My name is Jonathan Stupple, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this important event. And here at Georgetown, we have a speech and expression statement, which we will read now. Thank you for coming to this session. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speakers, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speakers and the organizing departments to share their perspectives and ideas, and not cause a disruption to the event's activities. At the end of the event, there will be a question and answer session during which you may ask questions, at the end of each panel, I should say. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of a question, and in the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question. And I'd like to invite up Interim President Robert Groves to offer welcoming remarks.
It's great to see you here today. This is a big deal for us, and I'm honored to be part of it and honored that Georgetown is sponsoring such an event. Religious and political implications of Nostra Aetate at 60 for Christian-Muslim relations. I'm also grateful to the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs, and the Department of Theology and Religious Studies for partnering. What a great set of partners. I want to thank Nader Hashimi, the director of ACMCU, John Borelli, the special assistant to the president on Catholic identity and dialogue, and their colleagues, Jonathan Stupple, Sam Wagner, for putting this all together. I also want to thank the executive directors of two local religious organizations who join us as sponsors. Larry Goldman of the Washington Theological Consortium and Ibrahim Anli of the Rumi Forum. And thank you for helping us put this together. Earlier this fall, some of you might have been at an earlier gathering in partnership with the American Jewish Committee on the influence of the document, the same document we're talking about, on Christian-Jewish relations over the past 6 decades. We held several panels on relations among the major traditions named in Nostra Aetate, including relations with Jews, Muslims, and followers of Dharmic traditions. This is a special time when we focus on Christian-Muslim relations and how this document informs that. Promulgated in 1965, Nostra Aetate marked a watershed moment for the world, for relations between the Catholic Church and other religious traditions. It affirmed a commitment, quote, to work sincerely for mutual understanding and to preserve as well as to promote, together for the benefit of all mankind, social justice and moral welfare, as well as peace and freedom. If you reflect on those words, they are central to Georgetown and Georgetown's mission. In 1789, before this beautiful library was even imagined, this land was part of the state of Maryland. The Jesuits, or at least one Jesuit in particular, boldly formed this school, open to all religions, a very big deal at that moment in history. It was an attribute that was permitted by the state of Maryland and then made nationwide with the First Amendment in 1791. But that founding spirit, especially in today's world, that founding spirit is part of what we do. And we have in our mission my favorite sentence, that serious and sustained discourse among people of different faiths, cultures, and ideas promotes intellectual, ethical, and spiritual understanding. We try to do that every day. It's hard to do it every day, but when we reach those aspirations, we think we're doing what our mission informs us to do. So this work to strengthen dialogue and understanding has deep roots in this particular place. Our Berkeley Center, established in 2006, the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, founded in 1975, our Center for Jewish Civilization, launched as a program in 2003, but then elevated to a center about a decade ago, and our Al-Walid Center, founded in 1993, with a mission to build bridges of mutual understanding between the Muslim world and the West, and to enhance understanding of Muslims in the West. So as we continue this shared work now and into the future, we're honored today to have an extraordinary panel of scholars and experts. Cardinal Michael Fitzgerald, who's participating virtually, I'm told, whom we've welcomed to Georgetown several times over the past 2 decades as a former apostolic nuncio to Egypt and delegate to the League of Arab States, and who served for 19 years as the Vatican's dicastery for interreligious dialogue. Tamara's son, the Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, Professor Emerita of the History of Islam and former director of the Al-Walid Center, and Ibrahim Musa, a deep friend of Georgetown, despite the fact that he happens to teach at the University of Notre Dame. We still welcome here. The Mirza Family Professor of Islamic Thought and Muslim Societies at Notre Dame. Welcome all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the insights you're going to share over the next few minutes with us. And I want to turn it now over to Professor Heck.
I'm Paul Heck. I'm professor of theology and religious studies here at Georgetown, and it's a pleasure to see you all here. So I'll be moderating the event. I'll just introduce each speaker, invite him, her to come forward to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll also have time for discussion and then Q&A at the end. So buckle up, you're in for a fun-filled ride. Just echoing Interim President Bob Groves, we're very fortunate to have a panel of leading experts with wide-ranging experience in the field of Christian-Muslim relations, and who, the 3 of them, know the ins and outs of the new era of interreligious encounter inaugurated with the publication of Nostra Aetate, the Vatican II document on the Church's relations to non-Christian religions. Of course, the Christian-Muslim venture comes with many questions, none more challenging than the religious and political implications of the document, the title of today's gathering. So on the one hand, we worship the same God and share a common home, but the details remain challenging, and that's what we're gathered here to do today, to discuss the lessons we've learned so far over the last 60 years and where the challenges actually might disclose new horizons. So first of all, it's a delight to welcome Cardinal Michael Fitzgerald, one of the great names in Christian-Muslim relations and Islamic studies over the last decades. I've benefited personally from his writings. As was mentioned, he's visited Georgetown on several occasions and served many years at the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue. He was created a cardinal by Pope Francis in 2019. Cardinal Fitzgerald is a member of the Society of Missionaries of Africa, which he entered 70 years ago to serve in Africa and in relation to Islam. Cardinal Fitzgerald trained in theology and in Arabic studies and is the author of several books, including Interfaith Dialogue, A Catholic View, Meditations on the Names of God in the Quran and the Bible, and Christian-Muslim Dialogue most recently. He joins us today from London. Your Eminence, the floor is yours.
Nostra Aetate was promulgated during the Second Vatican Council, as we know, 60 years ago. There was surprise in the world at the election of Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli as Pope, who chose the name John the 23rd. There was surprise because he was old, but I had predicted his election. I was in hospital at the time, together with another seminarian from Carthage, North Africa, in Tunisia, where the missionaries of Africa had a seminary set up by our founder, Cardinal Lavigerie himself. This was in 1957, or 58 rather. Exchanging on what would be the outcome of the conclave, I reckon that Roncalli had both the political skills, having been apostolic delegate to Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and then nuncio in France, before gaining pastoral experience as Patriarch of Venice. He certainly surprised everyone when he convoked the Second Vatican Council. He was elected despite his age, 77 years old, and expected to be a transitional pope. And in fact, he provoked a great transition in the Church through Vatican II, and not least through Nostra Aetate, the shortest document of the Council, only 5 paragraphs or sections, but not the least important. A few months after announcing the Council, he contacted the bishops through a survey conducted by the Secretariat of State to know what matters should be discussed. Nobody except a few bishops from North Africa, I don't have their names, and pontifical faculties at the Urbaniana in Rome and at the Athenaeum in Pune suggested interreligious relations. This came onto the agenda through a French Jewish historian, Jules Isaac, who had an audience with Pope John the 23rd and asked him to form a commission to repudiate the teaching of contempt for Judaism. John the 23rd, who had helped Jews escape Nazi persecution, particularly during his time in Turkey, accepted this suggestion. He entrusted Cardinal Bayer, a German Jesuit and biblical scholar, whom he had appointed head of the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity. Excuse me. Drawn up to help the preparation of the council. Bayer got to work immediately, making contact with important rabbis. It was this statement that would become the declaration Nostra Aetate. We could ask ourselves why the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity and not the Secretariat for Non-Christians. The interreligious department did not exist at that time. It was only instituted by Paul VI at Pentecost of 1964. In 1974, 2 commissions were promulgated. one for religious relations with Jews under the Secretariat for Non-Christians for promoting Christian unity, and one for Muslims under the Secretariat for Non-Christians, which existed at that time. While the Commission for Judaism, which still exists under the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity, it made sense having a separate commission for relations with Jews, which are not part of ecumenical work. But really, the relations with Muslims was part and parcel of the work of the Secretariat for Non-Christians, which became the Pontifical Council for PCID, Interreligious Dialogue. I had a connection with the Secretariat for Non-Christians before being appointed secretary in 1987. I was consultor in the Vatican jargon. This means one who is consulted rather than one who consults. I was appointed from 1972 to 82 because there was a tradition that the director of PISAI, Pontifical Institute for Arabic Studies and Islamic Studies, was appointed a consultor. I did various book reviews for the bulletin of the Secretariat, and also I was invited to take part in the Vatican delegation to Libya for the famous dialogue in February in the 1970s. I'm not sure of the exact date. This dialogue had been carefully arranged by the Secretariat with the Socialist Party of Libya. The speakers had been chosen and the topics selected, but this was to reckon without Colonel Gaddafi. Once he discovered that his Minister of Education was organizing a dialogue with the Holy See, he took over, and besides inviting imams from all over the world, he invited all those who had a connection with Libya, his biographers, and the head of a faculty of pedagogy in Ireland, who had accepted Libyan students. These were not part of the official delegations, but they changed the nature of the encounter. The meetings were moved to the main theatre in Tripoli. It is difficult to have a serious discussion on theological issues in front of an audience of 500. One afternoon during the pause, prayer for Muslims, refreshments for Christians who are considered not to pray. Gaddafi arrived. Cardinal Pignedoli, the head of the Vatican delegation, went down to meet him, and he took his seat as the head of the Muslim delegation. He had a question. What is the Vatican? Monsignor Rossano, the secretary at that time, replied that the Vatican is a hill where St. Peter's Basilica is built. Second question, does the Vatican have rules for society? A Jesuit in the delegation explained that the Gospels contain rules, but they can be interpreted in different ways. Conclusion drawn, there are no rules for society. I will give you some, and for about 2 hours, Gaddafi spoke in the Libyan dialect, giving the substance of his little green book, which had not yet appeared in print. At the end of the dialogue, there were to be conclusions. Monsignor Rossano, who had started the discussion of the conclusions, but he left the meeting quite soon because it started discussing in Arabic. Monsignor Abu Mukh, a Syrian Salvatorian, head of the desk for Islam, took over. At one point, they took the resolutions accepted by all in a meeting in Cordoba, which included that Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. I was sitting between two Oriental priests when the conclusions were read out in the theater, in the assembly. Neither of them reacted to this resolution. The journalists reacted, and Cardinal Pignedoli had to declare that he could not accept the conclusions, but he would submit them to his superiors in the Secretariat of State. The Osservatore Romano, official newspaper of the Vatican, published these resolutions with the comment, not accepted by the Holy See. The conclusion drawn from this was that the Libyans had tricked the Vatican, and dialogue with Muslims got a bad name because of that. For 10 years, roughly, dialogue was abandoned with Libya. Then the former Minister of Education, now retired and head of the World Islamic Call Society, came to ask if dialogue could be resumed not on political matters, but rather social questions. This was accepted, and for a number of years, meetings were held, 1 year in Rome and the next in Tripoli. If I may continue. Similarly with Jordan, Prince Hassan bin Talal, the brother of King Hussein, was Crown Prince of Jordan from 1962 to 1999, when King Hussein appointed his son by his second wife to be Crown Prince. A couple of weeks later, the king died. King Hussein died, and Abdullah II became king. Prince Hassan was interested in religion. He had funded the Al-Bayt Institute for Islamic Thought and the Al-Bayt University in Mafraq and the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. He also engaged in dialogue with Christians. Being a royal, he first reached out to the Anglicans at the Royal Chapel of Windsor. They decided to exchange on ethical questions and involve Jewish participants in the dialogue. He then reached out to Orthodox under Patriarch Bartholomew, but he asked for dialogue with the Holy See, and Cardinal Arinze, the president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, said, yes, on one condition. Do you put a condition to the Prince of Jordan? But he asked for dialogue. His one condition was that Arab Christians be invited too. This was readily agreed upon, and Patriarch Sabah willingly took part in the dialogue. We always proceeded in the same way. First, what do our religions say about the chosen topic? Second, what is the real situation, which is not necessarily conformed to the religious principles? When the topic women in society was chosen, we informed our partners that the first talk given on the Catholic side would be given by a woman. This would be difficult for us, was the reply. We shall have to ask an imam. When the imam gave his talk, the women in the Muslim delegation were horrified. They verbally attacked the imam, and the imam got all the men in the delegation to defend him. We didn't get anywhere with the discussions. I'm sure that with patience we would have got further. The second talk, what is the real situation, and the third talk were given by women Muslims. And Father Bormans on the Christian side gave the talk, what can we do together? But the spirit had been broken. Similarly, with the dialogue with the Iranians, the participants on their side were carefully chosen or monitored by a quango dependent on the government. I must say that the dialogues with the Iranians were the most interesting because they showed curiosity in knowing the vision of the Christians. With Al-Azhar, we did not get very far either, though Ali El-Saman, a journalist and lawyer who was helping the Imam and had succeeded in setting up an office for monotheistic dialogue, with which we entered into dialogue. He was interested in communications and had us speak on TV. And we got him to speak when the meeting was in Rome on Vatican Radio. When Benedict XVI spoke to the diplomatic corps and suggested that the countries could do more to protect their Christians, this was taken as an interference in Egyptian affairs. And I, as his personal representative, was considered as persona non grata. I went on my own initiative to greet the Imam of Al-Azhar for Eid al-Adha, and he had it published in Al-Ahram, the most important journal of Cairo, that he refused the greetings of the Holy See, but he had received me, and there were no other greetings. The ambassador of Egypt to the Holy See was recalled for consultations. Nobody in the Vatican had the gumption to do the same. I would have enjoyed a time in Rome. But let me return to Nostra Aetate. Israel had declared itself a state in 1948. The bishops from the Arab world were worried that a statement on relations with Jews, especially as the World Jewish Congress announced that it was sending an observer, and Israel official for Christian affairs, though no invitation had been offered. The first time non-Christians were invited to a synod was in the Synod for Lebanon, when they represented the three Muslim communities, the Sunni, the Shia, and the Druze. The bishops from the Arab world were opposed to this statement on Jews. They said, at least talk about Islam also. The bishops from Asia then spoke about Asian religions. So because of political factors, the theme of Nostra Aetate was broadened to embrace all religions. The Holy Spirit works in wonderful ways. I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Cardinal Fitzgerald, for those illuminating remarks on, I guess, what I would say are the unexpected vagaries of the journey, but also the common desire to keep moving forward. It is now a delight to welcome Professor Ibrahim Musa, who co-directs at Notre Dame the project called Contending Modernities, a very important project, global initiative on interactions among Catholic, Muslim, and other religious and secular forces in the world. Professor Musa's work has focused on developments in Islamic intellectual history with special attention to Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, the great scholar of classical Islam. Trained in India and South Africa, formerly on the faculty at Duke and Stanford, Professor Musa has numerous publications, and I'll just mention two of his books, Ghazali and the Poetics of Imagination, very stimulating perspective on the Ghazalian corpus, and also What is a Madrasa? So, Professor Musa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you, Professor Herz, for that kind introduction. Let me just open up my tools. Good afternoon, Provost Groves. I want to thank Professor Nadir Hashimi, Mr. John Borelli, and all the organizations involved for inviting me here today. And I'm also particularly pleased to see a whole bunch of friends, Professor Catherine Marshall, Professor Jane McAuliffe, Professor Tamara Son, and several other friends. We gather today to mark 60 years since Nostra Aetate, the remarkable declaration of His Holiness Pope Paul, and as we just heard from His Eminence, that it was really the great work of John the 23rd, but the declaration was announced in October 1965. It was, as Cardinal Fitzgerald reminded us, a milestone in the Catholic Church's encounter with the world's religions, an act of moral courage and theological imagination whose ripples continue to reach us today. The Latin title Nostra Aetate, in our time, already tells us that this was no abstract treatise. It was an attempt to speak to history, to heal wounds opened by centuries of conflict, and especially by the horrors of anti-Semitism, which culminated in the first half of the 20th century. In confronting that particular evil, the Church found within itself the grace to open a wider conversation with Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Scholars such as Louis Massignon, and I hope His Eminence has the opportunity to say what role he might have had with the various popes, whose lifelong study of Islamic mysticism inspired a profound empathy toward Muslims, helped shape the gesture of outreach. When I first mentioned Nostra Aetate in my Introduction to Islam seminar at Notre Dame, one of my students, eager and devout, quickly pulled up the document on his phone and read aloud and reminded me, the Church regards with esteem also the Muslims. He corrected me when I had said, perhaps too casually, that the Church recognizes Islam. Caught off guard, I smiled and said, recognition or esteem, either way, this is an improvement over centuries of estrangement. The declaration continues with remarkable clarity. They, the Muslims, adore the one God, living and subsisting in Himself, merciful and all-powerful. They revere Jesus as a prophet and honor His Virgin Mother. And it concludes with a noble exhortation, quote, let us forget the past and work sincerely for mutual understanding, for the benefit of all humankind, social justice, moral welfare, peace, and freedom. No Muslim, I believe, could disagree with these high ideals. You've invited us to talk about the religious implications. And for that, I will say, for the Muslims, the Quran had already issued a similar invitation 14 centuries earlier. In Surah Al-Imran, chapter 364, God commands, O people of the Scripture, come to a common word between us and you, that we shall worship none but God, and that we shall associate nothing with Him, and that none of us shall take others as lords besides God. Of course, some of us might disagree with the kind of caution Islam is sharing here, but verse chapter 262 is even more clear. Indeed, those who believe, and those who are Jews, Christians or Sabians, who truly believes in God and the last day and does good, their reward is with their Lord. No fear shall be upon them, nor shall they grieve. These verses show that theological disagreement, such as over the Trinity, does not preclude ethical and spiritual cooperation. Difference does not mean enmity. Thus, the religious implication of Nostra Aetate for Muslims is clear: to labor together with people of faith and people without faith for the advancement of human dignity, for justice, and for peace. History too offers luminous examples. The protection given to early Muslims by the Christian King Negus of Abyssinia. Centuries of convivencia in Andalusia might not have been all that great, but they were great examples. The hospitality of Eastern Christians toward Muslim philosophers and scientists. We need not only forget the past as the Council advised, but remember the best of our shared past. The third invitation was to think about the political implications, which I would say from human fraternity to human responsibility. The second horizon of Nostra Aetate is political. Cardinal Fitzgerald, in his written comments shared with us, notes that the document on human fraternity 2019, signed by the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar and Pope Francis, carries this legacy forward. That document states, history shows that religious and national extremism have produced what may be called a third world war fought piecemeal. History shows that religious and national extremism have produced what may be called a third world war fought piecemeal. Entire regions have become theaters of conflict, overshadowed by fear, disillusionment, and narrow economic interests. These words could have been written yesterday. In the last 2 years, we have witnessed, anyone with a phone, with unbearable anguish, the suffering of the Palestinian people, a campaign of settler colonial violence and ethnic cleansing unfolding before the eyes of the world. We have seen the devastation of Sudan and earlier of Yemen, each the product of regional rivalries and global indifference, rather even global assistance. And prior to that, the dismemberment of Iraq and the devastation wreaked on Afghanistan. And as we speak, the ongoing war in the Ukraine. If Nostra Aetate and the document on human fraternity mean anything, they oblige us, Christians and Muslims alike, not to remain silent. Our moral witness must not be selective. Pope Francis, may God have mercy on him, modeled this courage when he spoke with sorrow about every human life lost, regardless of nationality or creed. Yet our silence too, yes, our silence, too often is structured, not accidental. Here, the political theorist Robert Meister offers a sobering insight. In his book, After Evil, A Politics of Human Rights, published in 2011, Meister argues that post-war humanitarianism has replaced justice with sentiment. The slogan, "Never Again," became, he says, a way to remember evil while avoiding responsibility. Humanitarianism turns suffering into a moral spectacle. We feel compassion without changing structures. It replaces prophetic justice or revolutionary justice with redemptive pity. It absolves the present by declaring evil to belong to the past. Thus, the humanitarian system helps maintain the global order that often produces the very suffering it laments. It is moral consolation. It is moral consolation without political transformation. I know that well. I was born and raised in South Africa. Having seen the end of settler colonial apartheid, and after an elaborate Truth and Reconciliation Commission, yet today, the majority of South Africans are devastated by poverty and corruption. And 75% of the wealth and land are still in the hands of a minority. As Meister puts it, Humanitarianism depoliticizes outrage. We are facing a situation of depoliticizing outrage. It converts justice into empathy and history into therapy. This critique should unsettle all of us engaged in interfaith and human rights work. Our challenge is not merely to feel compassion, but to ask, what structures of power sustain the injustices we weep over? What structures of power sustain the injustices we weep over? Finally, the intellectual challenge. And speaking from my own background in theology, dialogue, however well-intentioned, can easily slide into politeness without truth. Each tradition must be free to articulate its theology from within its own grammar, not within the categories of the other. Take, for example, the examples of love and justice. In Christian theology, especially in its Augustinian and Thomistic forms, love stands at the very heart of the divine nature. God is love. Love overflows into creation and culminates in redemption through the incarnation. Muslim theology is different. And I don't think Christian and Muslims, when they talk about love, they're talking about the same thing. But they pretend they're talking about the same thing, and then they force each other to write, memoranda on love, and I don't think that the conversation goes any further. Muslim theology, by contrast, is built upon mercy, rahmah. Every chapter of the Quran, with the exception of one, begins in the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Mercy is not one attribute among others. It is the very mode of divine being, the creative and sustaining grace through which all existence unfolds. Love, mahabba, certainly has its place, but it follows obedience. It is the human response to divine mercy. In Islam, one comes to love through submission and through ethical practice. Love is the fruit of discipline, not the starting point. When a group of Muslim scholars issued in 2007 a document, A Common Word Between Us and You, I believe it was on the request of a Middle Eastern monarch, they framed Christian-Muslim commonality in the twin commandments to love and love neighbor. It was a generous gesture, yet it also risked a colonial flattening of difference where Christian categories, particularly agape, became the measure of all religious love. To decolonize love is to restore the plurality of theological imaginations. That is what we need to sustain. It is not to reject Christian insight, but to insist that others think about mercy, justice, and love in different hierarchies of meaning and in different faith traditions, and I just shared with you the example of Islam. True dialogue does not erase difference. It honors it. It seeks resonance, not resemblance. Let me conclude. First, to reclaim mercy as a shared ethical horizon. Mercy is not weakness. It is the creative will to live. It is what restrains vengeance and sustains coexistence. Second, to link mercy with justice, not charity, not pity, but justice. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught, the most beloved of people to God are those who are most beneficial to others. Mercy without justice is sentimentality. Justice without mercy is cruelty. Together, we, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and people of other faiths, we might contemplate whether there are on common grounds, whether we can find common grounds to explore mercy and justice in this key. This is merely an invitation. Third, to transform interfaith dialogue from polite encounter to moral collaboration. to address the crises of our century: war, ecological collapse, economic inequality, through a shared sense of responsibility before God. Let me end where we began, with Nostra Aetate's words, "in our time." The Council Fathers could not have imagined our world of global migration, digital proximity, and planetary fragility. And talking about global migration, I wonder if you watched the news last night in New York. Yet their intuition remains prophetic. Humanity's future depends on the religious communities that can coexist without compromise and collaborate without conversion. For Muslims, Christians, and all people of faith, this means speaking from conviction, not convenience, practicing mercy, not merely preaching it, and joining hands not to erase our differences, but to heal a wounded world. In the words of the Quran, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Cooperate in righteousness and piety, and do not cooperate in sin and aggression. And the Gospel of Luke reminds us, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. May we, in our time, live up to both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Musa. It reminds me of my discussions in the Arab world on this topic. They always kind of make these remarks. Okay, we can see how we're religiously and morally bound up with one another, but how do we make it real? How do we, have the faith that does justice and also speak with terminological clarity? Terminological clarity. We use the same words. Are we talking about the same things? So thank you so much. Very important points. Finally, it's a joy to welcome back to Georgetown Professor Tamara Son. Before coming to be the director at Georgetown's Al-Walid Center, she taught at William & Mary after training at the University of Chicago under Fazlur Rahman. So there's a great legacy there. Her most recent book is called The Religious Toolkit, Understanding Religion in the World Today. And her current book project is entitled Islam, A Global History, which is due out with Wiley in 2026. So, Professor Son, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And thanks, Dr. John Borelli, for organizing this, and to everybody who worked on organizing the program, and to all the sponsors and co-sponsors. It really is an honor to be able to address this to join in this important discussion, especially as we have just begun Jesuit Heritage Month and are reminded of our commitment to our core values, as Provost Groves pointed out, our commitment to be a force for change, a force for justice, a force for peace. I'd like to dedicate my comments today to the memory of our dear friend, Father Drew Christensen, who died in April 2022. Father Christensen was a distinguished professor of ethics and human development here at Georgetown. He served as editor-in-chief of the Jesuit magazine America from 2005 to 2012, and was an inspiring mentor and friend to countless students and colleagues. He also led the Office of International Justice and Peace at the USCCB in the 1990s, was a frequent consultant to the Vatican on nuclear disarmament, and served on the Vatican's team to negotiate the 2017 Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, making it real, as you just said. His last two books, A World Free from Nuclear Weapons and Forbidden, Receiving Pope Francis's Condemnation of Nuclear Weapons, are particularly pertinent to my comments here today, especially in light of one of his last emails to me. I'd asked him about Georgetown's involvement in nuclear research, nuclear weapons research in particular. He replied, "Right now, at least, it is a challenge I have to leave to others." He closed with, "Let us pray for our troubled country." So, Drew, this one is for you. Nostra Aetate is often described as revolutionary, the first time the Church officially taught respect for other traditions, and of course it was. But I'd like to focus today more on its evolutionary aspect, looking at the document and its political implications as part of a broader continuum of learning within the Church. The long view of Vatican II shows that its overall concern for understanding the Church's role in the world, including the responsibility of the laity, emerged within the context of people of faith learning how to actually live their faith, to discern the implications of their faith. That continuum has been developing at least since Leo XIII's 1891 Rerum Novarum on the rights and duties of capital and labor. Industrialization had led to social dislocation and increasing maldistribution of wealth and health, with heavy industries, environmental destruction, and pollution. Officially and publicly, Rerum Novarum brought the Church into the arena of social justice. Officially and publicly. It affirmed laborers' rights to a decent standard of living and to have input into their working conditions. 40 years later, Pius XII issued Quadragesimo Anno on reconstruction of social order. In the face of growing communist power, Quadragesimo balanced the right of private property with the common good. Again, officially and publicly articulating political views about government responsibilities in maintaining social justice. 70 years after Rerum Novarum, and before convening Vatican II, John XXIII issued Mater et Magistra, Christianity and Social Progress. It discussed government responsibilities concerning healthcare, education, and housing, and stressed laity's responsibility to be involved in the world. It said individual Christians must work to advance civil institutions, human dignity, and unity. Therefore, Christian social teaching was to be taught at all educational levels. So before Vatican II, a trajectory had been established. The Church's increasing emphasis on our individual and communal responsibilities to engage with the world, seeking ways to bring justice and peace to all peoples. This context is important for understanding Vatican II in general, with its emphasis on knowing the world so we can engage with it, contribute positively to it, correcting injustice, working for peace, as well as for understanding Nostra Aetate in particular, with its focus on the essential unity of humanity, including non-Christians, Muslims and Jews in particular. That was the springboard for decades of study and dialogue, as Cardinal Fitzgerald reminded us. Efforts to find common ground, conferences, meetings of religious authorities and scholars, sometimes lay people, sometimes the general public, but mostly officials and scholars. And I would like to talk about how far we have come. I would so like to do that, but sadly, sadly, long-term public impacts of dialogue have not been forthcoming. Sadly. In fact, interfaith dialogue seems to have become a marginal nicety, reflected no more clearly than in the recent Gaza peace plan devised by the US President and the Israeli Prime Minister. After describing the takeover of Gaza's development by the US President and former British Prime Minister, the document calls for establishing an interfaith dialogue process. I'm quoting, to try and change the mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. It really is hard to find words to characterize this trivialization of interfaith dialogue. Clearly, dialogue in and of itself is only part of a larger overall project. Nostra Aetate called for more than dialogue. It called for, quote, dialogue and collaboration in promoting sociocultural values. It called on us to work together, quote, for the benefit of all mankind, social justice, peace, and freedom, as was just noted. The interreligious struggle for peace and justice necessarily involves more than just polite discussions with like-minded people. It requires engagement with the world. Working together, we're called upon to intervene in injustice and to struggle to resolve conflicts. Struggling to resolve conflicts is what it means to work for peace. And I believe this was at the heart of what was truly revolutionary about Nostra Aetate. The focus on believers' collective responsibility to work for justice and peace. It was part of a trajectory that continues to this day. In 1986, the US Catholic bishops declared, "We are challenged to make a fundamental option for the poor, to speak for the voiceless, to defend the defenseless, to assess lifestyles, policies, and social institutions in terms of their impact on the poor." Another major step was taken in 1991 when PCID and the Congregation for Evangelization issued Dialogue and Proclamation, which sharpened dialogue and missions articulation of different kinds of dialogue. In addition to the standard theological dialogue, comparing beliefs, there are dialogue of life, basically living together, sharing life experiences, dialogue of religious experience, praying and worshiping together, and the one with the most direct political implications, dialogue of action. As Cardinal Fitzgerald and Dr. Borelli wrote in their 2006, The Catholic Church and Interreligious Dialogue, Dialogue and Proclamation called for local churches to work for, quote, development, social justice, and human liberation, to stand up for human rights, proclaim the demands of justice, and denounce injustice regardless of the religious identity, the religious allegiance of the victims. So what I'm suggesting here is that the church has been gradually dismantling an artificial distinction between what is private and religious and what is public and political. Every act, every decision and indecision has consequences that could impact the realization of the core values of human equality, justice, and peace. In 2020, Jesuit Felix Kerner published Political Religion: How Christianity and Islam Shape the World. which he called a work of political theology. Kerner presents what he calls, quote, the foundational commitment to social justice common to the Abrahamic faiths. He called it a political theological challenge, and he hyphenated that, a political theological challenge. They can't be separated. Kerner presents what he calls, drawing on Matthew's description of believers as the light of the world. Kerner says, the world is the arena in which we make manifest our commitment to the divine word. The world is the arena of faith because faith, like love, is performative. It's not just sentiment. Faith, like love, is performative. Faith makes us, quote, the divine means of transforming earthly conditions. He is a Jesuit, after all. We must be the instruments of peace. So when we're talking about the political implications of church teaching, we're not talking about something peripheral to doctrine, but our fundamental and essential responsibility to operate as a moral force within the public sphere, civil society operating as a moral force with inevitable political impact. In the same year that Kerner published his political theology, Pope Francis issued, Fratelli Tutti, further drawing out the political implications of Vatican II, specifically on the question of working for the common good and believers' responsibility to be a public moral force. Fratelli Tutti says that belief and worship are not enough. They're incomplete if their internal sacramental effect is not manifest publicly. It says concern for human suffering on a global scale should, quote, serve as the criterion for judging every economic, political, social, and religious project. And now is the time for decisive action. Referring to the parable of the Good Samaritan, Fratelli Tutti says, in moments of crisis, decisions become urgent. It criticizes those who, quote, think that conflict, violence, and breakdown are part of the normal functioning of a society and feel it is better to keep things as they are, I'm still quoting, maintaining a balance of power between differing groups, end quote. In fact, Fratelli Tutti says we should, now I'm quoting again, pray for the grace to be ashamed of what we've done. Referring not only to the Shoah, but also the use of nuclear weapons, the slave trade, the ethnic killing that continues in various countries, the death penalty, and war. Fratelli Tutti outright rejects the concept of just war. Quote, we can no longer think of war as a solution, and quoting Paul VI from 1965, never again war. War, I'm still quoting, is a failure of politics and of humanity, a shameful capitulation, a stinging defeat before the forces of evil. Let us not remain mired in theoretical discussions, but touch the wounded flesh of victims and recognize the abyss of evil at the heart of war. End quote. So my point, I think it's important to recognize Nostra Aetate's revolutionary recognition of the religious other and its call for us to work together for shared goals within the context of the Church's emerging emphasis on performative faith, faith in action, collectively directed toward creating a society that reflects the equality in which we were all created. That's actually a quote from Father Rahman. That's not Nostra Aetate. So yes, there are political implications of Nostra Aetate. We can no longer just pray for peace. I was still students. Praying for peace without working for conflict resolution is like praying to pass a test without studying. We can no longer just pray for peace. As Fratelli Tutti says, the time for action is now. And Pope Leo has continued the trajectory. In his recent Dilexite, he cut right to the chase, saying salvation depends upon concrete action, and calling on us to intervene in the structural causes of poverty and suffering. Yet it's painfully obvious that working for peace together with Muslims and Jews takes us directly to Israel-Palestine. And that's where dialogue breaks down, for obvious reasons. So I want to conclude with an end run around the hostilities and understandable insecurities that surround discussion of Israel's continued occupation and ongoing warfare in Muslim-majority lands. Instead of making Jews and Muslims uncomfortable, I want to make us uncomfortable. Us, educators in Catholic schools. Nostra Aetate called for us to work together for justice and peace. Mater et Magistra and Dialogue and Proclamation sharpened that call, adding the responsibility to educate for peace, to use education as a means to achieve peace. The Church isn't alone in its call for ending war. On Memorial Day in 1948, World War II hero General Omar Bradley said, "It is easy for us who are living to honor the sacrifices of those who are dead, for it helps us to assuage the guilt we should feel in their presence. Wars can be prevented just as surely as they are provoked. And therefore, we who fail to prevent them share the guilt of the dead, share in the guilt for the dead. We have too many men of science, too few men of God. We've grasped the mystery of the atom, and we've forgotten the Sermon on the Mount. The world has achieved brilliance without wisdom, power without conscience. Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants." In 1953, President Eisenhower lamented, quote, "the burden of arms draining the wealth and the labor of all peoples." I'm quoting, "Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger, those who are cold. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hopes of its children. This is one of those times in the affairs of nations when the gravest choices must be made if there is to be a turning toward a just and lasting peace." That was 1953, General Eisenhower. Eisenhower's famous 1961 warning about the political influence of corporations devoted to weaponry and other aspects of war included as well a warning about the impact of the military-industrial complex on education in universities. Quote, universities historically, the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery. In universities now, a contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. In his words, "The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded." End quote. So, no, we're not alone. But it seems to me that we, as educators in Catholic institutions, have a special responsibility in this regard, a clear responsibility to teach what we preach. looking at the long trajectory of the church's development of social teaching and its political implications, have we successfully integrated those teachings into our curricula? How much support do we give to programs in conflict resolution? I hesitate to say because it's so obvious, but sometimes I have to say it. Wars do not resolve conflicts. They never have, they never will. How much support do we give to programs in conflict resolution? Do we still offer programs that train people in the arts of war, as if war were a perfectly natural part of life? Programs with required courses such as grand strategy in military operations. Do we train people in how to promote the national interest, even at the cost of war? Teaching that diplomats have 3 tools to use in promoting the national interest: diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, and war. With regard to the Middle East specifically, do we teach aspiring diplomats how to resolve conflicts, to understand the historical roots of conflicts, the profound grievances of all parties involved in conflict? Or do we teach that national interests are, quote, maintaining a secure supply of oil and supporting America's allies and partners, specifically Israel and Saudi Arabia? How to take out enemy combatants to make sure our side wins? And that when our allies commit atrocities, the U.S. must nevertheless, quote, do what it has always done: balance values with interests. These are all publicly available examples from our own curriculum. So to conclude, the political implications of Nostra Aetate and our religious commitments overall are integrally related, and they could not be more important. We're at a crucial time in human history, in the midst of genocidal or potentially genocidal conflicts in Muslim-majority lands and beyond, enabled by the elites who profit from war, and much of it financed by our own taxes. Even as the US government slashes funding for healthcare, research, and education, military spending increases. According to Brown University Costs of War Project, over 60% of the federal discretionary budget and 78% of the US federal workforce are devoted to the military sector. So taking up Father Drew Christensen's challenge, we as educators therefore have profound responsibilities. Do we have the courage to address them? The grace that Fratelli Tutti calls for, to recognize and correct our errors? Or will future generations look at us the way our generations look at those who came before us, who had enslaved people, buying and selling them, those who perpetrated the Shoah, and those who developed and used nuclear weapons? Do we have the courage to address the militarism in our own curricula? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Son. I found it very helpful the way you located Nostra Aetate within the trajectory of Catholic social teaching. I think that's a very important insight going forward. So if I could now invite the Professor Son and Professor Musa, if I could invite you to come to the stage, we'll begin our group discussion. Hopefully, Cardinal Fitzgerald can see us.
Yes.
Because you're the most popular.
Is that right?
Yeah,
I guess I'm the guest, right?
yeah. So again, welcome to all of you. Just such rich presentations. Before I was thinking about an opening question, a kind of exercise of the imagination. When I teach on Nostra Aetate here at Georgetown, my students are flabbergasted, and we include reference to common word and human fraternity, and they're just blasted out of the water that these texts exist. And so, I guess my first question to all of you, and maybe we can start with Cardinal Fitzgerald, is just imagine you had a summer to teach a course with Christian and Muslim students. Imagine you were, for example, say at the Jesuit Center in Amman. You had US students, you had Arab students, you had other students from around the world. I guess what would be the concepts that you would want to convey about Nostra Aetate? I don't know if each of you could mention maybe a couple concepts or approaches. How would you want to teach students Nostra Aetate, especially, as Professor Son mentioned, at a time when interreligious dialogue has become a marginal nicety? So I hope that's clear. Maybe Cardinal Fitzgerald, how would you run a summer course with Christian Muslim students, with students from different cultures? What would you want to convey to them, some core concepts?
I would start with paragraph 1 of Nostra Aetate, the theological foundation that we are created by God. And I would go very quickly to the document on human fraternity, which I think presents a program. It's very wide-ranging, as I have said, but it gets Muslims and Christians and other people to work together. I have been much influenced by the rabbis for human rights who are making friendship with Palestinians and helping them to harvest the olives. I think this shows the way we should go. Not just expressing differences and examining the differences, but ready to work together, willing to suffer together.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something that has clearly been stressed, the importance of action together. Professor Son, would you like to add something to that? Your ideal course on Nostra Aetate, Christian-Muslim encounter, how would you shape it?
I think I would actually start with Felix Koenner's political theology. I think it is so important to recognize really the paradigm shift between modernist constructions of religion as separate from the rest of life. Paradigm shift, recognizing, going back to the original impetus, the development of all our traditions, which is, if we look at all our prophets, the core motivation is looking around. Where is all this suffering coming from? This does not reflect the creation that we all believe in. Where are we failing? Faith has to be performative, just as love has to be performative. That's number one. Number two, I'm not sure what text I would use, but it would be, you know what, it would probably be from early Leonardo Boff, for example, intervening in the structures that cause suffering, that enable suffering. It's not necessarily that they cause it, but they enable it. And those structures are political and especially, well, economic and military. So, again, praying is wonderful. Praying together with people of diverse traditions, alhamdulillah, everybody is welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan. And we can all suffer together. Or we can all work together to intervene in those structures that enable and perpetuate suffering.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that first point is so vital. Before we get to Christian-Muslim encounter, we really have to look at those basement issues. I mean, my students here, they think religion is a flavor of ice cream. And you got to get beyond that first before you can even get to the concept of dialogue. So yeah, thank you for that. Professor Musa, what would you include in your ideal?
Thank you. I don't know, before you spoke, I also wrote down structure.
Yeah.
I think in that ideal, cause on Nostra Aetate, what has it, in 65, what was it based on? You had the Cold War, various religious groups, Muslims, Christians, others, were involved in that Cold War. Muslims were mobilized to be on the side of Washington and London, and other parts of the Muslim world were pulled towards Moscow. There was a price to be paid by millions of people, depending on the political regime. But I think we've now reached a stage where we have such runaway capitalism that the structure is all about, it's all about the market. Karl Polanyi's book, The Great Transformation, shows that for the first time ever in human history, that the market dictates everything. The market dictates our values, I want to say the market dictates our theology. Our theologies are not immune. We can use every concept, original, with all our bravery and honest speaking, but I think we are surrounded by this market that dictates everything. Unless we are not prepared as people of religion to challenge that market that dictates everything. And that means that, and we all know the writing is on the wall. We are facing catastrophe at every level. So the writing is on the wall. I was reading Jonathan Lear's book on mourning. He just died in September. I only came to know most recently. And he talks about there that at some meeting he was talking about environmental destruction, a student stood up and said, "We will not be missed if the world goes." And that became for him a moment of meditation about this whole question of the catastrophe facing. So I think the structures, and I think what I would say is that two things. One is that I would expose those students to some of the writings of, say, someone like, from a Muslim perspective, a man like Allal Al-Fasi. You go to Morocco a lot, so you would know the name. Allal Al-Fasi was a theologian in Morocco, was engaged in the anti-colonial struggle. He was sent into exile into West Africa, came back, became a member of parliament, wrote extensively on the kind of the inner meanings of Sharia. And one of the things that Allal Al-Fasi has said, and many people have not picked up, he said, the biggest need of the moment is jihadul karama, the jihad of dignity. It's a complete different understanding of the idea of jihad. Means the struggle for dignity. That is the real jihad that we need. Schooling, education, human dignity, food, water, health. These are the basic issues of human development that we strive for. Now, I understand that people are going to say that you cannot feed all these the entire world if you don't have capitalism. Capitalism is the one that makes it possible. No, I think we can eat less. The whole world can eat less. We'll be less sick. We'll be less, addicted to drugs and so on. So, I mean, so I think there is a problem of capitalism. And if we are not prepared to look at the interface, because what you just said in your remarks, Professor Son, everything you talked about, policy, university education, everything got related to the market. Everything got related to capital, how our interests and our values. What are our interests? Our interest is money. And how do we dominate the world? And last thing, and I don't know if there's going to be another round of questioning, therefore, but I would like to say something about education.
Yeah, I think we can open it up.
Okay.
But we can certainly have space for that.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think that's a core issue, and it goes back to Cardinal Fitzgerald's point about starting with the theological foundation, is that we're actually all latent idolaters. We worship the market, and we got to get really, bodily aligned with the fact that we're meant to worship the Creator. And so that's a core issue. It's just interesting also that none of you led with religious freedom. And not that you would neglect it, but I think that's important. Religious freedom, of course, is important, but it can also isolate us. Well, you do what you want, you do what and so I guess that's just an interesting question that we're not leading with that per se. So anyways, it's now time to open it up for Q&A. I think we've got just about, 10, 15 minutes for Q&A before the panel concludes. Imam Hindi, yes. Please bring the microphone over. The microphone is coming.
Thank you for your presentation. You addressed the concept of war and the need to relook into it. Muslims have historically developed the concept of just war theory and the rules of engagement in war. So did Catholicism develop the concept of just war theory for so many years. Can we, in the 21st century, you think, come together as Christians and Muslims, or as Catholics and Muslims, with full authenticity, restudy, reevaluate, and commit to a new theory on war and peace and conflict resolution in light of what you said, that conflicts do not bring into conflicts. It is peace, it's conflict resolution. Do you find it possible? And do you think we need to push that way, and how?
Professor Son, yeah, do we need a new theory of war?
Well, I tend to go along with Pope Paul, right up through Pope Francis, and I haven't heard Pope Leo talk about this yet, but we can no longer accept, this is from a Catholic perspective, because I know Judaism and Islam have built into core documents, foundational documents, that war can be justified. But there's nothing like that in Christian core foundational documents. The theory of just war, the justification or rationalization of war came about only with the politicization of Christianity. And we actually canonized people who came out and said, you know what, war isn't a good thing. Let's try to avoid it. Let's talk to them first. But if they keep it up, yes, you can kill them. In effect, I'm doing a short form of that, and don't let any Augustinians hear me say that. But just war is not an essential part of Christianity, just war theory, and it's been repudiated by the Vatican. However, when I bring that up to even people in my own family, even the most devout ones. They're like, yeah, right, like you could ever do that. How are you ever gonna, just forget about it, just go to church, we'll pray about it. I don't mean to be dismissive, but I can't tell you how frustrating it is to look at the documents, to teach, to preach, to pray, and then to have even the most devout people say, now let's see, yeah, we'll pay our taxes and go right to war. And to have clergy offering prayers at public manifestations for people who not just condone but promote war. That is extremely frustrating. So, in my experience, I mean, having lived in diverse religious communities, just live, not, be there as somebody with a title or in some authorized position, just live. I don't find any problem on the ground level. I don't find the problems in just talking, living, sharing life. Religious differences are minimal in my reality, and there has been a fair stretch of my reality these days. It's at the institutional level where the problem is. And if we look, for example, building on what both of you just said about the idolatry of capital, if we look at, there's a document from 1965, I think, called the Sharon document, put out by William F. Buckley Jr. when he gathered together a group of university students from across the country at his house in Sharon, Connecticut, which is why it's called that. Motivated by, in Buckley's words, we don't have enough Republicans in universities, Republican students in universities. It was the era of civil rights and anti-Vietnam and whatever else was going on. And so there were a lot of protests in universities. And Buckley apparently was very concerned about that. We've got to cultivate young Republicans, and the whole young Republican movement came out of that. Not to be partisan, just data. I'm dealing in data here. You can Google the Sharon document. And what they wanted to articulate is that there are some core issues. We have to, I want to get it right, but it was basically cultivate students to recognize our God-given right to a free market economy.
So on that note, maybe I can ask Cardinal Fitzgerald to also respond to Imam Hindi's point. Do Christians and Muslims need to come together and kind of rethink this ease or challenge this ease with which people go to war? I mean, it might be difficult to kind of make a joint statement on pacifism, but with your wealth of experience, Cardinal Fitzgerald, how would you want us at this time, as Professor Son has mentioned, popes are saying no more war. How do we get Christians and Muslims to think about that together?
I think the questioner emphasized justice in the pursuit of war, and yet in Islam there is a condemnation of uprooting trees, of cutting down trees which are made to bear fruit. And yet this continues at the present time in Palestine. Settlers continue to cut down olive trees that are centuries old and still bearing fruit. Where they won't be replaced other people are coming to plant new trees. Maybe we should be ready to plant new olives and harvest them later. But we have to be together. I think it is important. There was a saying in the Philippines that a good Muslim is a dead Muslim. But when they started together in sports activities, so Muhammad was wanted on the team because he was a good goal scorer. And appreciating what other people bring is very necessary.
I think that would be an incredibly powerful witness, actually, Christians and Muslims planting olive trees together. So thank you. Yeah. Another question. Over here. Jordan Denari Duffner, a product of this fine university. Good to see you.
Yes, thank you all for your remarks. You've been my teachers, or I've cited you all in my dissertation, so it's wonderful to learn from you again today. I'm going to ask a question that I asked at the previous Nostra Aetate event last month, which is, if you could add something to Nostra Aetate's affirmation of Muslim belief and practice, what would you add? Because there's so much that's left out. There's so much that I think that we could affirm and praise about Islam that's not mentioned in the document. So if there was a Nostra Aetate 2.0, what would you add?
Professor Musa, I think that question is for you. Yeah, it mentions worship of God. It mentions, modeling their lives after Abraham, prayer, almsgiving. Something that really could help, something that could be added that would really help the mutual understanding.
I think that an idea of justice. I think there should be a greater explanation of how Muslims understand justice. And especially the idea of prophetic justice. That prophetic justice means that you must be witness to justice. Now, I want to agree with Professor Son that, and others who said that wars are no longer delivering what it claimed to do. Defensive wars, I don't know what that means. Defensive or offensive wars are based on unjust distribution of wealth. The killing of Palestinians, the fact that trees can be uprooted, the fact that for 1 hour, if there's a ceasefire for 1 hour, hundreds of Palestinian lives are saved. Hundreds. 1 hour of ceasefire. And it's ironic that it was not the Catholic president of this country, but it's another president whose religion I don't know, who could enforce a ceasefire. I mean, because he's a wheeler and dealer. But hundreds of lives have been saved, ironically, if not thousands. By this, in a month's time, there would be 1,000 Palestinians would be killed in Gaza if there was no ceasefire. But the biggest burden is on the American taxpayer that funds these wars, that funds those settlers who don't only uproot the trees, but also kill the owners of those trees. So I think our notion of justice has been completely bedeviled by our understanding of interests and market. It's a complete, abomination of what it is. And I think in some parts of the Muslim world, there is still that call for justice. And I will just give 2 examples. So I think the political theology, you've recently written a book, you mentioned it, the question of political theology and where justice should be part of it. And it comes from my own experience in South Africa, where we had the Kairos document And the key issue in the Kairos document was of the Christian churches, to which we all signed up, which was the notion of prophetic justice. 1985, the Kairos document was a pivotal shift in the understanding of theology of white South Africans. Okay? And the other issue is that justice means not only speaking, but doing it. Example I will give you, in the city of Cape Town, I don't think anywhere in the world that on a Friday night or on a Saturday, Jews are either starting their Shabbat or breaking their Shabbat at the Claremont Main Road Mosque in the city of Cape Town. You've been to that mosque. Okay? I think every mosque should host a Shabbat. Every, a gathering once a month. In the United States, we should have, whatever is significant for Catholics, whatever is significant for Muslims, host each other. And that hosting will make us teach each other what we need to know. So knowing each other, but we cannot know each other in this polite way that we are continuously teaching our students. And we are constructing our curricula in such a way that our students are not offended. So we don't speak the truth in the classroom anymore. We don't, in peace studies, in theology, it's all politeness. It's not, we don't speak truth. And our universities are captive to corporate interests. A university president, and Provost Grove is a friend, so he wouldn't mind me saying that. A university president doesn't fear a professor who's outraged about something. Doesn't fear a student who's unhappy. Maybe. But the university president today fears a trustee calling. Because that trustee is a source of millions and millions of dollars or getting other people. And that's the trap we are in. So everything we are talking about, Nostra Aetate, in our time, we can have all the Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Christians in Georgetown. We are still not going to have deliverables unless we do not change our mission towards the values we really value. So sitting together, having interfaith, I doubt interfaith gatherings. Nadir Hashmi had to do a lot of work to get me here today. I no longer think it's significant because we're just not doing any significant work in it. It becomes a talk shop, and I'm impatient. My life is running short. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that question of justice, certainly that's been discussed in Christian Muslim gatherings, but it's a really interesting moment as Muslim Americans move into the political sphere, and they're so attuned to justice. And I think that might really give a kick in the pants to interreligious dialogue and tie it more robustly to the Catholic social justice teaching as it's already grounded in the Islamic. But this is a really interesting development, I think, that speaks a little bit. These gatherings, we kind of just talk, and yet now there are these interesting moments with Muslims moving into the public sphere out of just the kind of university realm. So it's an extraordinary moment, and it's hopeful even while it can be challenging. So I'm afraid we're done. It's just so difficult to let go. I would tell my students, time is the curse of all of us. So just want to let people online know that we're going to take a break until 4:10, and then we'll have another panel to gather back here. But let's give a round of applause to Jan.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of our program of Religious and Political Implications of Nostra Aetate at 60 for Christian-Muslim Relations. But before we continue with the second panel for the day, someone needs to get their phone going here. There we go. I'm John Borelli, and I work in the President's office and have for many years. And with Sam Wagner, and this time with Nadir Hashimi and John Stupel, we've put together conferences like this, and I feel that none of us were really disappointed in the first session of the intensity of the discussion and how well it has gone. But before we continue, I want to introduce two good friends whose organizations are additional sponsors to our program, the Rumi Forum and the Washington Theological Consortium. They've provided some funding for the reception, which we will enjoy at 6 o'clock when this panel ends. So first, I'd like to introduce Ibrahim Anli, a civic entrepreneur whose career bridges nonprofit leadership and academic engagement. Following his studies, he served as a visiting scholar at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and then he joined the Journalists and Writers Foundation, JWF, in Ankara in diplomacy, as diplomacy coordinator, later becoming Secretary General of the Abant platform, JWF's, the Journalists and Writers Foundation's Istanbul-based forum for intellectual exchange. He went on to teach international relations and diplomacy at TISC International University in Erbil, Kurdistan. And since 2019, Ibrahim has been serving as the executive director of Rumi Forum here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Ibrahim.
Thank you, Dr. Borelli. I'm so honored to be able to join this esteemed audience of friends, colleagues, allies that are shouldering a great deal of the scholarly and practical work of meaningful interfaith exchange and building positive regard. And I'm particularly honored to be able to inform you that we'll be soon recognizing Dr. Borelli's nearly 50 years of leadership in interfaith work. He's going to be the 2025 Dialogue Award recipient of Rumi Forum, so well deserved. I'll begin with a personal anecdote of my first encounter with Nostra Aetate, as I was part of a team based in Istanbul receiving one interfaith study group after the other from the United States. And one very important destination was Vatican's Istanbul envoy, late Monsignor George Marovich. And I realize now that it was, as Professor Son was noting, it was faith in action, because as Monsignor Marovich was welcoming us, I think my always mostly predominantly non-Muslim American guests were being a little bit confused, because why is our young Muslim guide bowing down to kiss the hands of this Catholic priest and asking for his blessings? And why is this Catholic priest is speaking highly about a Muslim supplication called Jevshan, known as the armor, a supplication for protection? And as we were touring the spaces, the premises, he would stop in front of this elegant portrait of Pope John the 23rd and talk about his profound legacy of saving lives and pioneering the work that resulted in Nostra Aetate. So that was nearly 60 years ago that started with this phrase in our time. And at a moment that humanity is still reeling from the devastations, the memories of destruction, and the search for shared dignity as envisioned by this document, mutual understanding and positive mutual regard among all who seek God, is becoming more and more relevant. I'll just note that how the fourth paragraph of the document marked this historic milestone, as mentioned earlier. The Muslims were explicitly mentioned as as with esteem, the recognizing their worship of the one, the God creator, and their understanding of the prophets, and their reverence for Jesus, peace be upon him, and for his Virgin Mother Mary. For centuries, apparently, Christians and Muslims looked at one another through more fixed, sometimes essentialized frameworks and competing claims of truth. And with Nostra Aetate, with that monumental effort, we have been witnesses of a great deal of transformation together with other similar efforts. Some include, such as the collaboration with Al-Azhar and the visit of John Paul II to Muslim spaces, along with Jewish, Hindu, and Buddhist leaders in the pilgrimage in Assisi, and his being the first pope to enter the Umayyad Mosque in 2001. And we see an organic sequence of initiatives and documents that are traveling the way and advancing the work opened by Nostra Aetate, one including the document of human fraternity in Abu Dhabi, and signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. And for me as a practitioner, all the work going on around the world, inspired and elevated and encouraged by these documents and these important leaderly initiatives. As we stand here right now, I'm happy to inform you that a similar program is happening in Germany, and throughout 2025, Rumi Forum's sister organizations across the globe have been holding nearly a dozen major events, co-hosting or hosting, celebrating Nostra Aetate, including several locations in the US, Argentina, South Africa, Brazil, and Kenya. And as a note, Rumi Forum has a Center for Faith, Identity, and Globalization. I encourage everyone to check one of our most recent papers, authored by Father Francis Afu, a PhD candidate here at Georgetown University, challenging religious extremism, theological responses from the Najran Covenant and Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate invites us to see in one another the reflection of the same in divine mystery. It teaches us to honor the God is to honor the conscience and faith of our neighbor. As we reflect on its enduring legacy, let us recommit ourselves to that vision, which is becoming younger, not older, more relevant and more important. And while we celebrate this whole idea and its legacy, of course, as someone coming from the heart of the interfaith movement, I do admit that it's an incomplete success. And I welcome those comments that the work for interfaith needs new approaches. And we as Rumi Forum are always your natural ally in that effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. And we're grateful to Rumi Forum and your sister organizations for promoting this document of the Catholic Church. At our conference we had last month in September, we had statements from Jewish leaders saying, Jews in a way feel they own Nostra Aetate. Well, I say Rumi Forum feels like it owns Nostra Aetate too, and we're grateful for that. And now I want to introduce the Reverend Dr. Larry Goldman, who for close to 15 years, soon will be, has been executive director of the Washington Theological Consortium, a federation of 10 graduate theological schools in the Christian tradition with associate members in ecumenical interfaith and religious education. Dr. Goldman's work focuses on building collaborations between the schools, developing specialized courses in ecology and theology, ecumenism, criminal justice, spirituality, and Muslim Christian studies. Larry has served the wider church as a youth minister, local pastor, college and seminary professor, researcher, and mission educator in the Philippines. He served on the research team for the Carnegie Foundation study of clergy education, Educating Clergy, 2006. He taught at the Dominican University of California and the Graduate Theological Union out there, directing their research project entitled Sacred Visions and the Social Good. He also directed the Narrative Leadership Project at the Alban Institute. His most recent book is Clergy Education in America, Religious Leadership and American Public Life, 1785 to 1935, which explores how Protestants, Catholics, and Jews have educated clergy as culture builders in religious and public life. Dr. Goldman holds a bachelor's degree in history from Stanford, a Master of Divinity and Master of Sacred Theology from Yale Divinity School, and a TM from Columbia Theological Seminary, and a PhD in Contemporary Theology from Emory University. He's an ordained Presbyterian minister. Dr. Goldman.
Thank you, John, and it's an honor and delight to be with such an esteemed group of scholars and leaders in the interfaith field. I want to share a little bit about our history engaging Muslim-Christian dialogue. The Washington Theological Consortium has been dedicated to Muslim-Christian dialogue since our encounter with Sheikh Taha Jabir al-Alwani. And that was in the late 90s. His commitment to al-ta'aruf, or getting to know each other across the faiths, is coordinated in his mind and writing with the need for internal reform of each tradition, especially through the ethics of disagreement, as he called it, and the Islamic principle of ijtihad, which, as he describes, is a disciplined intellectual effort to derive legal rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah, while taking into consideration the variables of Muslim society in different contexts. Dr. al-Alwani and his family founded the Graduate School of Islamic and Social Sciences with a short acronym of GSIS, which is unfortunate, but it included the first Muslim chaplaincy in America, and the school became an affiliate member of our consortium, so that we were blessed to have, as a Christian theological consortium, the first Islamic member of any consortium in the country. Nostra Aetate stresses the importance of Muslim-Christian dialogue, and the, excuse me one second, I was trying to time myself, but I'm going to let you time me, John. And in a way, Muslim-Christian dialogue, in terms of getting to know one another, like al-ta'aruf of Dr. Alwani, through discussion and collaboration, made possible by our shared commitments to one God, a moral life, honoring Mary and Jesus, the final day of judgment. Now, when I share, as a Protestant, the second coming of Jesus in an interfaith group, there are two groups that are really interested in this, and they're nodding. It's the Baptists and the Muslims. There you go. And the emphasis in the engagement in these shared efforts is a framework for further dialogue. But I think we do need to be honest that Nostra Aetate makes no explicit acknowledgement for the need for internal reform of the tradition, as Dr. Alwani was calling for. There's a shift in the document about Christians being grafted onto God's covenant with Israel and the Jews, a la Paul's vision in Romans, and the continued integrity of the Jews as God's people. But there is no explicit call to reconfigure the Christian tradition in order to weed out or marginalize supersessionism. Imagine a scholar, an Islamic scholar, challenging our Christian traditions to reconfigure and reform from within. We should also remember that many people who pioneered Muslim-Christian dialogue before Nostra Aetate, the Catholic scholar already mentioned, Louis Massignon, the Anglican missionary and scholar Kenneth Cragg, the Reformed missionary and physician Samuel Zwerner. In the Washington Theological Consortium, we try to carry on Sheikh Taha's legacy. And we do this through a structured program in Muslim Christian studies, but also a rather new course, an immersion course in Dialogue of the Abrahamic Faiths, where we bring Muslim, Jewish, and Christian seminarians together. Students do learn in these courses about positive connections, and many of these will be familiar to you. The daily Salat prayers by Muslims helps Christians reclaim the praying of the hours. Discussing shared prophetic figures in the faith is very rich. Traditional ritual bathing, burial rites in the faiths, especially Judaism and Islam, and the power of mysticism in the faiths. Marriage and divorce or annulment as question of does it restrict or does it protect women's rights? The sacredness of holy texts and their adornment in houses of worship. The place of a jihad, and we've already heard about the jihad of dignity, but the emphasis on spiritual struggle in jihad is lifted up by students, linking figures like Said Nursi and Martin Luther King Jr. The shared religious conversation is an aim to build the foundations for further collaboration in this work. But there are points of contention, as you can imagine, and they are equally important to learning and dialogue, if not even more so. Difference is about honoring and learning. It's not about assimilation. And I believe that these points of difference can be calls to self-examination of what might need reform in our own traditions, in the spirit of Sheikh Taha. These differences, well, questions like, was Mary a prophet? Well, no, not for most Muslims. No, not for most Christians. But the minority voice in Islam is a challenge, especially to us Protestants, to look at the Magnificat as a prophetic utterance, one that can actually overturn social structures of power. Another one, some students among the Christians have holy envy for the Quran. And it's more like its eternal origin, its clarity, its authority. It was written in a manageable period of time. And while many Muslims see the historical and multivalent nature of the Christian scriptures as signs of fallibility, our Muslim students in general don't have holy envy at all about anything, because it would imply something missing in their faith. It's an interesting challenge. Sin is personal in all three faiths, but it's also collective, especially for Christians, as God in the scriptures holds his people and other nations accountable for their wrongs. Now, calling collective wrongdoing a sin is kind of a category mistake for the Muslim students. It's just not the correct use of the term. But Christians kind of don't quite understand why sin is so privatized among the Muslim students. Does God judge barbarous nations or not? Another point, comparing Jesus to the Quran, not Prophet Muhammad, is more fruitful in our learning. Both Jesus and the Quran are claimed to be identified as the Word of God. Both have eternal origin. Their physical forms are created, at least for some Muslims in the Quran. And the comparison also makes the Trinity a little less crazy to our Muslim colleagues. In conclusion, I want to share two brief insights. What is the place of argument and consensus in interfaith dialogue, especially with our students? In our classes, Jews argue about almost everything, but they do agree on the terms to argue about. That's very interesting, isn't it? God, Torah, Israel, land, things of that sort. All Christian students in our courses love Jesus, right? But then they argue about what that means, his person and his work. They argue about the Trinity. They argue about the status of the scriptures. And they argue about the need of a priesthood or not. Remember, these are Catholic and Protestant students that we work with. The Muslim students, however, agree on almost everything in our courses. Professing Shahada, praying 5 times a day, spiritual power of Ramadan, and more, of course. Their collective certainty and clarity puzzles, especially the Christians. On the way home, from one exercise, I proclaimed to Dr. Jimmy Jones of the Islamic Seminary of America, our modern liberal Christians don't stand a chance against the clarity of your Muslim students. The second and final theme is this. What place does religious humor have in these courses or in dialogues? Jewish students tell jokes and laugh the most about their faith. Christians tell jokes and laugh about some aspects of their faith. And Muslim students, they can laugh about human frailty, but they don't laugh about anything else in their faith. Not our students, at least. Jokes about prophets or sacred texts, even about Jesus, are really offensive to our Muslim students. It's been a learning curve. Yet I think more humor is needed, appropriate humor, not offensive humor, and that it will help us on our shared journey. Each of us here, I hope, has some answer to the question, what happens when a priest or pastor, a rabbi, and an imam walk into a coffee shop?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's exactly what I was thinking, Larry. How does that line go? You know, I was thinking a kosher ice cream parlor. So now, in our time, Nostra Aetate, in our age, in our time, we had a wonderful panel that began with In Our Time, 1965. His Eminence Cardinal Fitzgerald brought us forward immediately after the council in a few decades. And our other panelists added on, Professor Son and Professor Musa, about In Our Time 2025, 60 years later. Not many documents are being celebrated at the 60th anniversary. I know of one other one, the other declaration on religious education got a special papal document on it. But otherwise, this is the one of 16 being celebrated. It's interesting. Right now, we want to talk about In Our Time, which will be for some of our panelists in the future, the accomplishments, challenges, and suggestions for future Christian-Muslim relations. So I invite our panelists and our moderator, Professor Nader Hashimi, to their chairs. I will say this as you're coming up. Take your places. I think, Nader, you'll be in the center, right? And then, at the end. All right, good. And he is the director in our time of the Alawite Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at our Edmund G. Walsh, A. Walsh School of Foreign Service here at Georgetown. He is the author of Islam, Secularism, and Liberal Democracy, Toward a Democratic Theory for Muslim Societies, and co-editor of the People Reloaded, The Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future. Also, The Syria Dilemma and Sectarianization Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East, and a 4-volume study on Islam and human rights, Critical Concepts of Islamic Studies. You may have seen or heard him before on PBS, NPR, CNN, Al Jazeera, and Pacifica Radio, which I always like to tune to after I rent a car at San Francisco International Airport. It comes in right away. So, we are delighted that we're able to welcome a couple of old hands, and a couple of new set of eyes on all of these questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, John, for organizing this conference, for bringing us together. Welcome, everyone, to the second session of this conference entitled Accomplishments, Challenges, and Suggestions for Future Christian-Muslim Relations. I just came from class, so I missed the earlier session. And all of my students, I wanted to talk about just one topic today, and that was the election results in New York. And they wanted to talk about Mamdani. And it just so happened today there was an article that I accidentally discovered about, it was titled, Why Zoran Mamdani is Not Shy to Talk About Religion and Faith. And there's this interesting sort of connection here to this broad theme of Muslim, Christian, and of course Jewish relations that have manifested themselves, perhaps unbeknownst to many people, in the recent New York mayoral race, which possibly, if we have time, I'll try and work into this particular session, because I always believe that when we have these discussions about Muslim-Christian dialogue or interfaith dialogue, that these conversations should not happen in the abstract. We have to be, I'm always a firm believer, we have to connect them to the real world in which we're living into concrete issues, concrete problems, and concrete controversies. And of course, we're having this conversation in very abnormal times. We're living in the second term of the Trump administration. We're living in a time where as a political scientist, I don't believe it's accurate to say that the United States is a democracy anymore. We're very much in the midst of an authoritarian transition. And of course, the global picture is very dark indeed in many of the important areas of the world that we're connected to. So I have a series of questions that John has been very generous in putting forwarding to me, and the panel knows about them. I'm going to ask them. I think the format basically is we're going to have a public conversation for roughly an hour, maybe a little bit less. Then we'll transition over into Q&A with the audience, and if there's online questions, we're happy to take them as well. And then we'll try and wrap up sometime around just before 6 o'clock. So in terms of the panel, it's a huge honor to share this stage with distinguished colleagues who know something about this topic. Danish Faruqi is a visiting researcher at the center that I direct, the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. Here at Georgetown, he has a PhD from Duke. He's a scholar of migration and mobility in the Middle East and North Africa. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on Syrian Sufi religious scholars who joined the 2011 uprising against Bashar al-Assad, and he's actually published 2 books. An excellent book that I was happy to blurb, Egypt and the Contradictions of Liberalism, Illiberal Intelligentsia and the Future of Egyptian Democracy, and an earlier book, From Camp David to Cast Lead, Essays on Israel, Palestine, and the Future of the Peace Process. Halil Ochi is a PhD student in theology and religious studies here at Georgetown. He holds a diploma in interreligious studies from the Anglicum of Rome, a master's of letters in historical and systemic theology from the University of St. Andrews, and a BA in Islamic theology from the University of Tübingen. His research interests are in theology, focusing on interreligious encounters from a comparative perspective, and his doctoral work aims at the study of logos and kalam, the word of God as a shared concept of revelation for advancing Muslim-Christian relations. Ryan Craig is a special assistant to the Vice President of Mission and Ministry and Director of the Academic Initiatives in Georgetown's Office of Mission and Ministry, where she oversees the Magis Immersion Seminar program and co-leads the Magis Seminar to Jordan. She completed her PhD at the Catholic University of America on the use of Quranic proof texts by medieval Christian, Arabic, and Syriac authors, while in residence as a doctoral fellow at the Tantur Ecumenical Institute in Jerusalem. Her monograph on the crucifixion in Christian-Muslim exchanges will be published next month by De Gruyter. And last but certainly not least is Pim Valkenburg. He's a professor emeritus in religion and culture and a retired director of the Institute for Interreligious Study and Dialogue in the School of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University of America. Before that, he was professor of theology with a special focus on Muslim-Christian relations at Loyola University in Maryland. Born in the Netherlands, he studied theology and religious studies at the University of Utrecht and the Catholic Theological University in Utrecht. In the Netherlands, he worked with Jewish and Muslim foundations to develop dialogue programs. And after a sabbatical leave at the University of Notre Dame with Professor David Burrell, he migrated with his family to Baltimore, Maryland. 2 books that bear on this session is a book that he published, Nostra Aetate, celebrating 50 years of the Church's dialogue with Jews and Muslims, and No Power Over God's Bounty, a Christian commentary on the people of Scripture in the Quran. A very distinguished and powerful panel indeed, which I look forward to engaging with. And so the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel, and take, maybe up to 5 minutes to reflect on it, to share, broad thoughts on it, since this is a conference that is celebrating an anniversary. An anniversary tends to sort of imply we're looking back on the past. So if the question is, from your perspective, what are the major religious and political accomplishments and improvements in Muslim-Christian dialogue, cooperation, and mutual understanding in the past 6 decades since the Nostra Aetate proclamation? We'll start with you, Pim.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. I think if you look back at 60 years of Nostra Aetate, there's a lot to be happy with, even though we will come to what we're not so happy with. So accomplishments, I think maybe the most powerful accomplishment is the number of friendships in academia and elsewhere that have developed as kind of a matter of fact. So half of my PhD students at Catholic University have been Muslims. I mean, that's unthinkable, I would think, 50 years ago. Who would think that a student, female student from Saudi Arabia, would write her dissertation on Surat an-Nisa and its structure at the Catholic University of America? So a lot of friendships have developed. I would also say a lot of Catholics have become aware. The flip side of that is we still need to work on that because, as I have told some of you, at Catholic University, you sometimes hear from students, sometimes from colleagues to say, well, yeah, we're not doing that any longer. And I say, well, you're not free to pick and choose on what we do. This is not woke, this is Catholic teaching. And if you don't believe me, let's read together. And I think that's the job of a scholar, to invite everyone, let's read together. So I would say that's the basic accomplishment that we have. Also in the structures, so there are now several dialogues. I'm a member of the official Catholic Muslim dialogue, the national dialogue, co-supported by ISNA and ICNA and Orange County in California. That has been there, by the way, John Borelli was the co-founder of that, so it has been there at almost 30 years now, I believe. I also was able, with some funds from my university, and interestingly, the funds came from a Saudi Arabian gentleman at the embassy who wanted a chair in Islamic studies and sent some first money for it. Then the Gulf War happened, 1991, I believe, and he never came back. So the money sat there. But it was explicitly for Catholic Muslim initiatives. So together with Professor Zeki Suri-Toprak at John Carroll University, who has a Said Nursi chair there, we were able to found a group of Catholic and Muslim scholars who come together twice a year for theological talks. And I heard many of you, and I kind of agree, only talking doesn't change the world. On the other hand, I would say it is my task as a professor to show to students how things can be done if they go well. Of course, they not always go well, and we can learn more from that than when it all goes splendidly. Okay, I'll come back to some of the challenges later.
Yep, that's actually going to be my follow-up question, so look forward to hearing from you on the challenges. Danish, major accomplishments, religious and political accomplishments over the last 60 years in terms of Muslim-Christian dialogue and cooperation.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Nader, for the Office of the President, for giving me the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I want to kind of begin by reflecting on the comment that my dear mentor, Dr. Musa, mentioned in the earlier panel, the phenomenon of jihad al-karama, which is the struggle towards dignity. Because interfaith as a phenomenon has a proclivity, for better or worse, to devolve into what the Syrians and the Palestinians called hakifadi, empty rhetoric. Interfaith is only meaningful to the extent that it gives rise to the tangible elevation of dignity for all parties involved. And even though I'm a historian, I'd like to kind of begin the groundwork with the very contemporary moment, that the crisis and the genocide of Gaza is perhaps a silver lining is, it is a moment in which tangible interfaith initiatives have taken place that have, in fact, bettered or moved the needle forward towards karama and dignity. The Catholic Church in particular, both the previous and the current Pope having spoken on behalf of the people of Gaza, having recognized the state of Palestine, and having sought accountability for the state of Israel for its violence inflicted upon the people of Gaza is a step in the right direction. And I see there are actually reverberations in the broader body politic. And I never for a million years thought I would say anything positive about Tucker Carlson, but I'm recalling a conversation between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz, the latter of whom said, as a Christian, it is my responsibility to basically do exactly everything that the current nation state of Israel says. And Tucker Carlson said, I'm a Christian too. My theology does not stand by that. So now that the bravery of the Catholic Church among several other Christian organizations has had tangible reverberations even in popular discourse, that to be a Christian is no longer to give a blank check to the specific policies of a particular nation state that happens to be invoking the vocabulary of Judaism. And I think that is a remarkable step in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Ryan.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Nader and John, for inviting me to be part of this panel. As Nader mentioned, I have had the opportunity to be involved in our Majlis Jordan immersion experience, but I've also had the opportunity to lead several student immersion trips and conversations around Muslim-Christian dialogue. So I'm going to be sharing from that sort of perspective as I offer some reflections here of very practical and concrete ways where we have actually brought the legacy of Nostra Aetate into those experiences and those dialogue. Just the ways that we've done that. And so the two that have come to mind are the Aman message and the document on human fraternity that's been mentioned before. The Aman message, though it was focused on the Muslim community, I think it is coming from this sort of ethos of Nostra Aetate. And it was interesting, I just read the other day that Jordan just marked the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate with Cardinal Pizzaballa, who noted that Nostra Aetate might not be known in the region, but its spirit is alive and well. And I think that's reflected in the Aman message and the Common Word initiative that comes later on out of that as well. And we talk about this extensively on the Majlis Immersion Seminar with my co-instructor, Imam Hendi, is sitting here today. We talk about this, we actively engage in dialogue participating with the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies in Amman, the University of Jordan with students, and meeting with local clergy. And I think that the students really appreciate that learning that the church has deeply thought about this and has thought about types of dialogue and has put forth types of dialogue, which Tamara mentioned earlier, theological exchange, social action, spiritual experience, and the dialogue of daily life, and has taken steps to live out those commitments. And what I see from students is that many have encountered the dialogue of social action. I think around Gaza has been a big component of that, but they've encountered that. They have somewhat encountered the dialogue of daily life, especially here at Georgetown, because we make interfaith such a pronounced part of our students' campus experience. But the real rewards of experiential learning that I've seen are in sharing spiritual experiences. And that has been something that they have said has been transformative for them. And that often leads to meaningful theological exchange on things that I would never think of as topics, but it's what the students want to gravitate to. But it's through those shared spiritual experiences that they're able to have those theological exchanges that are sort of unscripted and undictated by the academics and the theological elites. And those lead to genuine relationships. And I think those are some of the concrete ways that this is still affecting students today. The document on human fraternity has also been noted. So I'll say a couple more things about that. I was able to lead a group of 12 students from around the world to Abu Dhabi for the 5-year anniversary of the document on human fraternity. And I think from this, what students took away from this was that there was, coming out of that initiative, there were multiple offices, councils, and committees that were created and promoted to elevate dialogue, but there was a recognized need to engage young people in this. And I think that this is the key, right? I would agree that the sort of theological, academic, diplomatic dialogue is not moving the needle forward. It's really listening to what young people are asking for and what they are concerned about, and building that connection between those registers of dialogue, between the dialogue that happens up here and the dialogue that students care about in the sort of daily life and spiritual experiences. So that, again, I think might be an accomplishment, but also an encouragement to continue seeking those ways to connect those registers of dialogue. The other thing that stood out to me being part of these experiences was being invited and hosted in Muslim majority countries. And I think that that gets to like a place aspect, that we are often holding these conversations in places and spaces where Muslims are minorities, and being able to really push for changing that and being willing to go, literally willing to fly across the world to engage in those conversations. Students have said that that has been transformational in their understanding of what dialogue can look like. And it also provides a way for Muslim students to feel like this is happening in their own circumstances, their own context, cultural context, all of that. So neither one of those documents are without criticism or critique, but I think the foundations are there for further study and practice of dialogue and increased mutual understanding. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Halil?
Thank you, and thank you for the organizers to invite me to speak here. I think my experience looking back and reflecting on the accomplishments is slightly different, because for the most part I have only studied the history of the 60 years. I've been only maybe around for the other 30 years of Nostra Aetate. So that tells me that the current state of interreligious dialogue, or where we are at right now, is kind of like a given to me. Cardinal Fischer said that to be religious means to be interreligious, and I think we are, or I am, living or manifesting this the state of the interreligious dialogue, I would say. But looking back onto the developments of Nostra Aetate and what followed, I can tell that I think we reached a situation in which we came from mission to dialogue with, especially with regards to other religious people, because even for the Catholic Church, it took some time in order to figure out what interreligious dialogue meant, and I think this is evident from the documents which have been published after Nostra Aetate, so it took some time in order to figure out what dialogue meant. And I think for Muslims, especially for us today, there's a similar work to be done in order to participate in the interreligious dialogue with Christians, with Jews as well. I think the goal of interreligious dialogue, mutual understanding, I think we came a far path. You know, we have a graduate program which I'm part of here at Georgetown, which is specifically focused on religious pluralism, which is the goal of this program, in order to learn more about, systematically learn more about these religious traditions. And I think we came a far way with that. But I must say that given what happened these past couple of years with the conflict going on in Gaza, I think this is where interreligious dialogue and the goal of dialogue of mutual understanding is also being tested, because I've seen that even though we came a far way to learn about the other, I think we still fail in forms of inter-religious cooperation. This is what I've experienced given the ongoing conflict, not only between Muslims and Jews, but also in this triangle of Muslim, Christians, and Jews. And I think there needs to be, and there will be, and I've already seen publications, theology after Gaza, So there will be more to be thought and reflected upon what interreligious dialogue is about and can do. And I think I've heard some of like the frustration almost with this endeavor, and that's what's been my experience this year as well. I've been to a major interreligious forum in Rome, and there, among the participants with me, there were like either students who were already involved for some years in interreligious dialogue, or who were new, and most of them came to the conclusion that it just fails in some avenues of like acting together and providing some change.
Great. Before moving on to the next question, I just wanted to play devil's advocate and push Ryan a little bit to say more about the documents that you mentioned. Okay? Because some skeptics will say, and I hear this from my students, these documents that you mentioned on Muslim-Christian dialogue, the Iman message, the common word, the document on human fraternity, they don't really matter in terms of actual relations. The only people who read these documents are the ones who draft them, and their practical impact, a skeptic would say, are negligible. What would you say based on your lived experience?
Lived experience, I would say that as an educator, it provides a great opportunity to critique the documents, right? To critique them and critique the lack of action maybe coming out of them, and then ask students, what do we do about that? How do we correct that? So I would agree. I don't know how valuable the documents have been on their own. It's what we do with them that matters.
Yeah, great. And then, Danish, I wanted to just pick up on a point that you made that I think is very important in this context, looking back and connecting it to the real world in which we're living in, the question of Gaza and the role that Pope Francis has played in not just speaking out about the genocide in Gaza in general terms, but specifically, repeatedly doing something that I think oppressed a lot of Muslims, the fact that he would call every single night the beleaguered Christian community in Gaza and express solidarity and sympathy, even saying on the question of genocide itself, which is a topic that some people don't want to engage with, he said that, look, international scholars and experts have to look into whether there's a genocide going on and make a determination. They actually have done that already. But the fact that he opened that door, I think, has gone a long way in showing that, you know, the Catholic Church is not sort of disconnected from the real world in which at least many Muslims are living in and feeling the pain of, you know, what is a certifiable genocide. So I'm glad you brought that up. And that brings us now to the second question of the major challenges to mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims today. We've touched upon some of this already, but the question would be for the panel, you know, what are the major challenges in your reading to mutual understanding between Christian and Muslims today? And how would you like to address them?
Yeah, I would like to talk about two different types of challenges. The first one, coming back to what has been said already, but it should be said more, is that there is a lack of listening. To be concrete, I told you I'm a member of the Catholic-Muslim dialogue. Jordan is also a member of that dialogue. And we noticed that that dialogue kind of fell flat. Why did it fall flat? Because the Muslims did not really get the impression that we as Catholics were able to really listen to their situation here in the United States of America, where they felt sidelined. They could not say anything because it was always interpreted as being anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. So I would say listening better, that's a big challenge. And really trying to understand where our partners are. In that point, I need to say something that I really don't like to say. And that's the following. I was in Rome last week. I attended the official event at the Vatican with Pope Leo, the commemoration of 60 years Nostra Aetate. It struck me that in his speech there, and also in the catechesis the following morning, at the general audience in front of 60,000 people in the Vatican Plaza, he spoke a lot about condemning anti-Semitism. And quite rightly so, because that is kind of the origin of Nostra Aetate. It's also something that theologically needs to be said time and again. However, he did not say anything about condemning Islamophobia. He did not mention Nostra Aetate 3, which is the paragraph about Muslims, once. He talked a lot about Nostra Aetate 4-5, our relationship with the Jewish people. He also talked about Nostra Aetate 1 and 2, what we all have in common as religions. He did not quote Nostra Aetate 3 once. I think that's not a coincidence, because these events are carefully scripted. So something is going on here. That's a big challenge. Find out what's going on, do something about it. It's also a challenge for me, of course. That's one. Two, I also was, of course, I'm a theologian, so I went to a conference at the Gregorian University towards the future, rethinking Nostra Aetate today. So it was in the same week. Dan Madigan, well known here, gave a talk in which he said, well, Nostra Aetate was not really able to take Islam seriously in its theological claim that the Quran is the word of God revealed to Prophet Muhammad. It didn't talk about it. It couldn't talk about it. I can explain you why. But it is our challenge to start doing that work. And I must say, I sound negative, but I think we sometimes need to do that. Theologically, we have done something, and again, I don't want to point to Jordan all the time, but she's one of the persons who did some of the work pointing towards what can we say from a Christian, maybe more specifically a Catholic point of view, about the Quran, about Muhammad. So there's huge challenges there. I will come back to that later on.
Great. Those are excellent comments. Thank you very much. Donish, over to you. Major challenges.
Okay, so first, do I have your permission to kind of broaden the coalition to an Abrahamic context, Muslim, Christian, Jewish? Is that
Absolutely
okay?
no censorship here at Georgetown.
Okay.
You have
Yes,
complete
but
liberty to
we
do
said
so.
we said Muslim, Christian, so I just wanted to make
You
sure
have a
that.
statement.
Okay, very good. So with that permission, I proceed. I think one of the big challenge of interfaith dialogue and conversation is, as I alluded to previously, the proclivity for what the Syrians, the Palestinians, and Jordanians called hakifadi, empty rhetoric, as under the auspices of interfaith. And here I'll speak about a particular initiative that I have a certain amount of credibility to speak on because I did my doctorate at Duke University where this initiative was conceived. There was an interfaith initiative referred to as MLI, the Muslim Leadership Initiative, which was designed as an exercise to bring Muslims to Israel to learn about Jewish theology and to learn about Zionism. So the ostensible purpose of this program was to get past theological barriers that could then in turn give rise to a more equitable settlement between Israelis and Palestinians. The dilemma with this is that this is not a theological challenge in the first place, but a challenge of settler colonialism and land theft. That reality was wholly elided from these discussions. Moreover, a lot of investigation, in particular, the journalist Sana Saeed wrote a very iconic essay, I'm forgetting the exact title, but she coined the term faith washing, the use or the weaponization of the vocabulary of interfaith to elide political conflict, and in this case, political violence, to basically turn or contort a conflict predicated on land theft, on the violation of dignity, into an irrelevant conversation about competing theologies. And I mean, in the interest of time, I won't go into full detail, but briefly, deeper investigations, particularly within the Muslim American community, revealed that the funding sources of this initiative were deeply challenged and actually very Islamophobic. Moreover, the auspices under which participants were selected for this initiative were not transparent. They were done very secretively, and then ultimately, the Muslim American community back home had a very big problem because this initiative ultimately violated the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, which Palestinian civil society has unilaterally encouraged its supporters to participate in. So this is an instance in which interfaith is operating, to use a cheeky pun, in bad faith. And ultimately, if interfaith conversation is worth participating in at all, it needs to maintain the dignity of all parties involved. And this particular initiative did no such thing. And funny enough, on the periphery, I've tried to stay in touch. I've tried to keep up with the ultimate future of the MLI program. What has ultimately happened is previous participants have just kind of kept quiet and have hoped that the world has forgotten that this initiative took place. It was a colossal blunder, a colossal failure on every imaginable level, that moving the needle forward on any kind of equitable settlement between, in this case, Muslims and Jews, we can't point to a single win as a result of this disastrous program.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. If we have time, we'll come back, and the question I would have for you as a follow-up, Danish, would be if there's any equivalent sort of projects, bad faith projects that were purporting to advance mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims that, produce the same type of result as the example that you cited at Duke. Because I think that is a problem in terms of, major challenges to understanding if you're organizing initiatives that are rooted in bad faith to begin with. Ryan, looking at major challenges to mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims today, how would you address that topic?
So I thought about this in terms of posture, because I was thinking about the challenge, but then also how would you like to address it too? And I think this gets at listening and empty rhetoric, that the posture, the challenge posture is hubris. It is, and I think we even see this in the document. I know we'll talk about this in another question, but the document talks about forgetting the past. And we can't do that. We can't ignore the harms that have been done or the harms that are being done now. And we should be asking questions of positions of power and stuff like that. And so I think there's already within the document a tone of hubris that is still a challenge today for Christian-Muslim dialogue and understanding. And when I asked my students, so I asked my students for their reflections on these questions too, because I wanted to hear from them. And what came back was particularly from my Muslim students, and I think both of you have touched on this, was that there is an underlying expectation of permission to discourse after disclosures, after they have laid aside things that they hold near and dear. They are allowed to enter and allowed to sit at the table and have the conversation.
Can you give an example of what you're referring to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about this with Gaza and with questions around land and land theology, right? They're asked to lay that aside to be able to enter into a discussion about something completely unrelated. They have to give the disclosure that I am not anti-Semitic, right? Like they have to give those disclosures before we are willing to let them sit at the table and have a conversation about anything else. And I think that puts students, it causes real harm to students, and it is constantly putting them on the defensive. And if you're asking someone to be on the defensive to enter into dialogue, that is not dialogue.
Exactly. Yep.
It's not. And so I think that the root of that is hubris. That's sort of the underlying root of all of these. And then one of the things that I've seen on the ground when we've had conversations with Christians on the ground in Jordan and Palestine, in the quote unquote Holy Land, is that there's really more tension and frustration between the Christians of the Holy Land and Western Christians than there is between Christians there and Muslims there living side by side. And again, I think that gets to sort of Western Christian hubris of thinking that we have the right position and theology and not listening to those on the ground. And this, once again, is rooted in the history of Nostra Aetate. I listened to a conversation with David Neuhaus yesterday, who talked about the sort of pushback when the document was being formed, and Christian clergy from the Holy Land saying, you need to listen to us. And so I think that is the biggest challenge, is that we're not actually listening. I'm speaking as a Christian, we're not actually listening to our own brothers and sisters before we're even coming to the table.
Great, thank you. Halil, major challenges to mutual understanding between Christians and Muslims.
Right. I think the major challenge to mutual understanding is to first talk about what we aim with mutual understanding, because it's been already mentioned there are like 4 forms of dialogue, and I think if we talk about mutual understanding, that tells me that we are pursuing theological exchange. But mutual understanding can also be the fruit of dialogue of life, or dialogue of action, or dialogue of spiritual experience. And I think they aim the same thing, but just learning about the religion will not get us there. What I mean by that is like that won't make us respect our religious other, or have compassion with them, or treat them with dignity. Just like the theological exchange, which is profoundly about mutual understanding, just won't do the job, I would say.
So what would do the job? Let me push you a little bit.
I think what's been already like a mix of it. It's not only that we sit together and talk about these texts, but that we also include, not only reflection, but also that we do things together. Like, I think it's very profound, but sharing a meal is pretty significant in this regard. And like, it's not to be left only to the study of text, but help people to build these relationships. I was in this program in Rome for an entire year, and this was about study, and they try to they're programming in order to build these relationships over the course of a year. But it was kind of like frustrating and surprising to see, after an entire year of study, what ended in June 2023, and in October 2023, those relationships were already shackling because of the conflict. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm trying to say, like, only the study or, come together because we want to be polite to each other doesn't really do the work. I think those goals of mutual understanding need to be coined with, more profound goals of like that we need to build good persons, like essentially. And I think mutual understanding is also at odds, especially now with the ongoing conflict between Jews and Muslims. I wouldn't say that it would do anything to either resolve the conflict or to have better relationships with each other. I would propose then for the communities to go back and actually pursue intra-religious dialogue. Because as Muslims then, when we can't pursue the interreligious dialogue, we need to go back and talk to our communities. For the scholars and the practitioners of interreligious dialogue to tell their own communities to still, not end up running into conflict with religious others. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the clock and time's moving by very quickly. I have one sort of other big, broad question for the panel. I want to introduce a couple of topics, and of course, I'm very mindful of the audience, that you've been sitting patiently, and that there might be questions that you would like to pose to this distinguished panel. So the third question for the panel is a broad one, an open one. What religious or political topic or topics would you like to address in a Christian-Muslim dialogue, and why? What religious or political topic, if it was up to you, would you like to address in any form of Christian-Muslim dialogue, and why would you want to introduce that topic? Pim?
Yeah, I would like to, again, say a few words about 2 topics. One topic is spirituality. So in these 4 forms of dialogue, I think it has always been my conviction they need to be in communication with one another. So if you only do the talking or only the praying or only the action, that's not enough. It's about the communication. But I feel like if it is true, and I remember again at the same conference, Leila Demiri from Tübingen, who also has a background here, said what Muslims in their reactions to Nostra Aetate liked most was this idea that we together worship the one God that is associated with Abraham. If it is true that we Muslims and Christians together worship the one God, why cannot we pray together? Why cannot we show each other the sources of our social action in a way that is convincing for others? So that's one. The second is more theological. And again, it goes back to where we have not been able to really get any further. So I am working on a book on George Anawati, who is one of the authors behind the text of Nostra Aetate. The type of theology that he works on is Kalam theology. Now, I cannot explain all of it. Most of you know what we're talking about. So it's a lot about, let's say, the one God. It's not so much about the Quran or Muhammad. So that kind of limits what Nostra Aetate says. Now, thinking about history, how is it that he had this Kalam type of theology? Or how is it that he did not touch some of the theological topics? That has to do, of course, with a lot of things. What I'm working on right now is going back to Thomas Aquinas, who was, of course, his source of inspiration, who said you can only discuss with others using sources that both parties agree on. And Thomas Aquinas said, following a long tradition, Muslims do not read the Bible. Of course, they did, and the Quran says different things, but okay. And Muhammad even did not allow his followers to read the New and the Old Testament, because then they would discover his fraud. That's what Thomas Aquinas said. So that has led to a long tradition, even in the documents of the Catholic Church, of not taking seriously the Muslim faith as faith. So I would say my topic for the future would be, we need to say more than just Islam is a natural faith, a natural revelation, which is what the scholastic tradition has said. Of course, we cannot directly say the Quran is revealed by God, Muhammad is the last messenger of God, but we should refine our language. And I think the language on Abraham that Louis Marcion has tried out gives us a first clue on how to do that. But there's a lot of work to be done.
Great, thank you very much. Danish, topic, religious or political, that you would like to see addressed in the context of a Muslim-Christian dialogue today, and why?
I mean, given the fact that we are in an age of the rise of authoritarianism globally, both within the United States, Europe, and elsewhere, I think it's extremely important that our interfaith conversations address the interplay and intersection between spirituality and social justice. Again, going back to the upliftment of dignity. And I'll telescope out for a bit just by going deeper into the Islamic tradition before coming back to how we can build bridges between faith communities. So particularly the Islamic spiritual tradition has a pretty bad reputation for being kind of disconnected to social justice concerns. Speaking in my own work on mysticism in Syria, when I talk to Syrians, they're dismissive of my work, saying, the mystics are like they're the handmaidens of authority. And there is a lot of reason for that suspicion. But in actuality, the deeper we go, the more we realize that spirituality in Islam is meant to be connected, inextricably connected to tangible outcomes. I'll begin with a line that's attributed to Imam Malik ibn Anas, where he says, I'll say it in Arabic first, "Man tafaqaha wa lam yatasawwaf faqad tafassaqa, man tasawwafa wa lam yatafaqqa faqad tasandaqa, wa man jama'a baynahuma faqad tahaqqaqa." The person who practices law, i.e. a tangible discipline, and not spirituality is misguided. The person who practices spirituality with law, without law, is a heretic. The person who has conjoined the two has achieved the truth. Accordingly, spirituality is meant to be an action-oriented exercise. As an addendum to that, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ saying very unambiguously, La rahbaniyata fil Islam. There is no monasticism in Islam. The monastic tradition of the Benedictines, as respectful as it is, this is not what my community is meant to be following. We are an action-oriented community. We connect with society. Our spirituality is about engagement with society. And I think ultimately interfaith conversations should be grounded in that dual connection between spiritual upliftment, spiritual elevation, and tangible outcomes. And to use a medieval example, I'm thinking in particular of the 15th century Moroccan saint Muhammad al-Jazuli, who's probably most well known for his compilation of the Dala'il al-Khairat, which is arguably the most famous set of benedictions on the prophet ever produced by Islamic civilization. But what's often elided, even among followers of Jazuli's work, who recite the Dala'il al-Khairat in gatherings around the world, is that Imam al-Jazuli was also a mujahid when the need arose. When Spanish and Portuguese invaders started taking up residence, shall we say, in Moroccan port cities like Tetuan, like Asila, like Agadir, Imam al-Jazuli took to uniting the totality of Moroccan tribes to militarily fend them off. So his spirituality was a spirituality impregnated with social justice. If anybody's interested in more, I would invite you to look at the work of my dear mentor, Vincent Cornell, who's really the authority on Imam al-Jazuli's work. But to bring this back into the contemporary, Muslim and Christian interfaith efforts need to be similarly impregnated by this interplay between spirituality and social justice, or to use a Quranic analogy, between the pursuit of haqq and the pursuit of sabr. And one note of optimism is the campaign of Zohran Mamdani, who was very successful in not only building coalitions within New York City of multiple very diverse groups of Muslims across multiple different ethnic lines, but also building remarkably diverse coalitions among Christian and Jewish New Yorkers, to the point that despite Zohran Mamdani being very unambiguous in his policies with regards to Israel, I believe 30-something% of Jewish New Yorkers happily supported Zohran Mamdani as their next mayor. And that's a testament to the power of coalition building, specifically with social justice as the tangible end goal.
Very good, thank you. Ryan, what religious or political topic would you like to see introduced in the context of a Muslim Christian dialogue today, and why?
I have two, if that's
okay. Sure.
So one came out of discussions that I had with some fellow practitioners of the Building Bridges seminar. This is a group of Christian and Muslim scholars who come together and spend a week doing theological dialogue, but also the dialogue of daily life. And so these were kind of conversations had over lunch and whatnot, and really reflecting on the struggle that we are having in this moment to hold on to hope. And what would that mean for us to really examine how our communities understand hope, how they offer hope, and how is hope faith in action? How is that performative aspect of our faith? How do we live that out? And this is, really directly related to Gaza. Like, how are we reflecting on that? Cardinal Pizzaballa said that our task is to keep hope alive through concrete gestures of humanity. So what does that look like to do that together, right? How do we do that together? And then the other topic that came from my students, but is really kind of directly connected, they said that what they were most concerned about was questions of theodicy. How is God still good and loving in the face of Gaza and Sudan and Ukraine? And everything else that's happening in our, current environment. And what they wanted to push for was not just this sort of shared desire to hold religious leaders and institutions accountable, but to say that as communities of faith in a loving God, we should be able to provide better and collaborative solutions to at least point ways forward to work towards peace and justice, right? Like we should be able to do that. And if we're not, if we're failing to do that, what is sort of fundamentally wrong with our conversation there?
Very good, thank you. Halil?
I would say that I would like to add the theological reflections on the religious other in our tradition, which is under like the subject of theology of religions, because in my own endeavor here in interreligious dialogue, which began with scriptural reasoning, which I found a good practice for anyone really, I came to appreciate to know more about where I as a Muslim draw from my resources in order to engage in dialogue. And I think that's always helpful to go back and reflect upon them and like really embody, because that will help us to have a theological as well as a spiritual grounding in order to go into these conversations. And I think this will help us for entering into dialogue, because sometimes it feels, if we only draw from Nostra Aetate, that Christians dictate the dialogue, and because it's the conversation will be built on Nostra Aetate. But I think as Muslims we have our own resources, and I've written about the Convert initiative as providing this theology of religions for Muslims in order to enter into dialogue and draw from Muslim resources.
Very good. Excellent. So we're coming up on about 1 hour of conversation here, and we have just over half an hour left. I want to give a chance now to the audience to maybe pose or ask a question or two. I have a few more themes I'm going to throw into the conversation by way of advancing the broad themes of this panel. So the floor is open. If anyone has any questions, comments, or queries that they'd like to pose to the panel, we can turn to you now. I'm not sure if there's a mechanism to take questions from online. Okay, we have people in here with microphones. So if you raise your hand, we'll get you a microphone and you can pose a question, and then we'll move forward. Yes, Ibrahim.
Thank you very much to the panel. I must say, and I think some of you might have said it, so this is the comment and then I have a question, is that I am moved by the extraordinary interfaith and solidarity that I've seen between Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and secular people on this Gaza question globally. It's extraordinary what you see, tens of thousands of people in cities around the world. I think there's a gem of something in there, right? It might not be articulated as the theological, but that is the ground. I mean, brave people going into Congress, confronting, often from the Jewish faith, or people who are secular, etc. The Tucker Carlson was, so here comes my question. Tucker Carlson was mentioned, and Professor Tim is of European background, and maybe you can throw some light on this, is that I have seen that some elements in the right, Bannon, Carlson, and others, are turning against Israel. They keep on saying, no, Israel is our first thing, but meanwhile, there's a lot of critique. It's about all the money that's going out, right, to Israel, and we need the money here, so they put it under kind of fiscal responsibility garb. But sometimes it slips out that they don't want more American wars, forever wars in the Middle East. Because these forever wars create an outflow of Muslims out of the Middle East into Europe. And Europe's character is being changed. And Tucker Carlson said, Europe is a Christian continent. Okay? Now, I think all continents have been changed. I don't know which continent is still pure. From Japan to China, we are all mixed up, okay? But there seems to be this issue. So I think in this country, and in Europe, there is this very deep fear. I mean, in the Netherlands, there have been many mayors of major cities. Rotterdam had a Muslim mayor. London has a Muslim mayor. It's making, America just discovered that London had a Muslim mayor, right? I mean, the politicians talk about it, but he's in his second or third term already. And Sharia is being mentioned as the boogeyman in this thing. So my question to you is, am I alone in thinking about this in this issue? I know Pope Benedict, for instance, was very, very concerned about the character of Europe, and he also used it as a way to say to Christians in Europe, you need to be as upstanding and practicing as Muslims are, etc. But what kind of light can you shed on this? Because I am struggling with this phenomenon.
It sounds like a question for you, because it's a question about Europe, it's changing character. It's playing out here as well, yeah, with the MAGA movement, absolutely.
Well, the first thing probably I should mention is in Rome, I was listening with one ear to what happened there, with the other ear to the Dutch elections. So Geert Wilders, with his anti-Muslim party, is no longer the biggest party in the Netherlands. So that's a sign of hope. I also noticed, but it's more in Southern Europe, Italy, there was a general strike, pro-Palestine general strike against the influence of Israel. Many universities all over Europe kind of end their ties with Israeli universities. I know some countries are heavily debating, and Germany is among them, which is a first, because Germany never dared to say anything for understandable reasons against Israel. They started to be concerned about the amount of money that goes into the weapons that they deliver directly or indirectly to Israel. So I do see all kinds of things happening. I also see that, let's say, the power balance between Jewish voices and Muslim voices is somewhat different in Europe than it is in the United States. Let me leave it at that.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to Ibrahim's question about this whole debate in Europe about its the changing character of its identity and the sort of the forces behind it, and what role there is, I guess, for people of Muslim and Christian and other faiths and no faiths to play and try and pushing back against this theme that is very much a characteristic of the rise of right-wing populism?
So
yeah.
Let me chime in. I can only speak anecdotally, but just taking a look at Elon Musk's X platform over the past several months, I've seen a lot of very heated debates with right-wing personalities making the case that it is our right to minimize the influence of Islam in this country. Megyn Kelly made a very acerbic tweet saying that we are right to be concerned with the advancement of Islam in this country. And Mehdi Hassan just kind of retooled the tweet and basically said, if you had said this about Jewish people, your career would be dead upon arrival. Similarly, I think it was actually Mehdi Hassan as well, who compared paranoia over the call to prayer in Dearborn, Michigan, a Muslim majority city, to the sound of church bells as no less innocuous. And then right-wing commentator Matt Walsh, who I believe is in cahoots with Ben Shapiro. I can't get my right-wing universe entirely clear, but I believe those two figures are in cahoots. Matt Walsh said, that's because Christianity founded this country. Islam played no role whatsoever in that founding. So deal with the church bells and shut the hell up. Yeah. And then Mehdi Hassan had to go and further correct him and point out the role of Muslim slaves in developing this country. So the point is that this great replacement theory that's very popular among certain MAGA circles does maintain that this country was founded by Christians and there is a specific plot to replace the white Christian population with brown Muslims. Yeah. So this is not simply a European phenomenon by any means.
This is a theme that we've seen, in a lot of right-wing discourse about, the threat that Islam poses to the character and identity of Europe, Western societies, people coming in. Islam doesn't believe in our Western values, and so they have to be shut up and they have to be controlled. So yeah, this is a dominant theme. How we push back against it and what people of religious faith, Christian, Muslim, Jewish faith can do about it is, a big question. I see that, Tamara, you have use the microphone so we can record this.
Thank you. Right, and so after I made such biting comments about structural issues, I want to jump in here, especially to
Could you hold the microphone closer? I'm having
reinforce some of the comments that have been made, especially Ryan, about the impact of just one-on-one, communal level interfaith. I remember doing a talk a million years ago. I think I was in Santa Fe. They wanted to know about Islam. It was their Council of Foreign Relations. And so I gave all of the, history of contributions, et cetera. And so some donor to the organization stood up and he said, well, you have said all the things that Muslims and Christians and Jews have in common. Now tell me the biggest difference. What's the biggest difference you see? And I thought and thought and thought, and I had to say, I don't see a big difference. And I think that is the very real reflection of the impact of interfaith, of dialogue and what we're talking about. And I think that is the answer to the great replacement paranoia. Because when I hear the azan, when I hear the call to prayer, when I hear other people's prayers, I think, yeah, that's good. I only had 400 years of Catholic education, but I recognize that. I see my own commitments in other people's commitments. And I think that's the very real, on the ground. That's where interfaith dialogue is so effective in being able to, so say you've got some MAGA child of a MAGA parent or something, and then they're saying how horrible it would be if Muslims or Jews took over the country, and the kid would be able to say, and?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think actually it echoes something that Halil said that I jotted down here. To be religious is to be interreligious. So when it's the common values that tie people together despite their different traditions that they come from, but they have a common set of values and sort of beliefs. And I have the exact same experience. When I hear church bells, or I hear the adhan, or I hear some other religious tradition in a public space, I immediately identify with it, even though it might not be from my specific tradition. But I understand the value, the sacredness of it, the need to protect it, which challenges the MAGA discourse that says, no, this is a Christian country. Church bells, yes, no adhan. Those are the rules. You don't like it, get out. So I think that's the challenge of how we sort of forge that different narrative which is really the challenge of advancing religious pluralism based on common values. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. Let's go to, there's other questions from the floor. Yeah, John.
Thank you very much. I wonder if the dynamic is really different. In Europe, we can't talk generally, don't you think, Pim?
Sure.
Because the dynamic in France, I think, is different than the Netherlands in terms of absorption of the Muslim population, not without problems. But here in the United States, it's different in that though people want to say Christianity was our foundation, there was a strong amount of fear of Catholicism. I mean, John Adams had some terrible things to say about Jesuits, the worst and most hated race in the world. We don't want them planting themselves here, this kind of thing. And anyone who has an experience or sense of the history of Catholicism in America knows about having experienced that kind of exclusion that Catholics often felt. I think isn't that our dynamism different here, and that young people in America have now been so exposed in most locales to diversity. And this is not recent. This is even people older than Ryan, like my children who are now in their 50s and 40s, that I think the multiculturalism here has really had a greater impact on our society. in many ways in terms of acceptance of one another.
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anyone want to engage it? It's really the question of the comparative difference between Europe, which tends to have established identities for their political communities that seem to be much more rigid, versus the North American experience, where we are multicultural melting pots, where everyone, if you go back farther enough, has come from somewhere, and there is the idea of religious sort of liberty and pluralism that's embedded, at least in the American story as from its inception, thus allowing this part of the world to be a bit better at dealing with these issues than the European context. Does that resonate with people, or what sort of points of difference would you interject into the conversation? Halil?
Yeah, I moved to America only like 2 years ago. I've lived the rest of my life in Europe, in different countries. And I've been only asked about my race, for instance, when I moved to the UK. In Germany, no one asks you about your race. So like, I would say that in America, I'm not being questioned about my Muslim identity as much as I would say, for instance, in Germany, because this is the major other. We have lots of people from different countries in Europe, but what binds them together is Christianity. So like the major religious other has been, for many years, Muslims, and especially Turkish Muslims. But I think in America, that identity is not as much questioned. But of course, then why I mentioned race is that the structural problems and discrimination is rather with race questions here. I mean, I cannot speak much about the Muslim experience during 2001 and after, but I think these days the structural problems towards discriminating and isolating people is more linked towards race.
Race and not religion. Right?
Yes, and in Germany, it's more coined to culture and religion. And what I wanted to say to the question earlier, I think with the Muslim identity and like intercultural, interreligious dialogue in Europe, I think two major events. One, the Syrian refugees in 2015, over 1 million Muslims entering, mostly Muslims entering Europe. And the current conflict going on has created, I would say, very different identities coming together. Because after 2015, the political environment has more moved towards the right, and we can see it nearly beginning in the Netherlands and going all over Europe, building right-wing governments. But now there's a shift. I don't know how much it's related, but to the historical moment, I think it speaks to it because, again, Netherlands is moving away from that during solidarity movement in Europe through, which is mostly, like Christians, Muslims, on a political issue. For instance, in Italy, I mean, it's a right-wing government. I don't think the right-wing government is any welcoming to. It's mostly Muslims from Bangladesh there, or coming over from North Africa. I don't think they're any welcoming to Muslims there, but there's a major movement of especially young people who are going to the streets and protesting because of this political issue going on.
In Gaza.
Yeah.
That speaks to Ibrahim's point about these cross-religious, cross-ideological solidarities that have been built around the genocide in Gaza, and how that could sort of be a project that could be built upon to advance and promote other problems that we're facing in the world. We have about 15 minutes left. I want to, Imam Hendi. Yeah.
Thank you. On the question of challenges, I think you all touched on it, but maybe we need more. What I call the politicization of interfaith work. The U.S. State Department pays millions of dollars, and has for so many years, using interfaith work to advance its political agenda in Muslim countries. and one can refer to specific programs and names and who did what to advance their agenda in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq. I was myself asked to be a part of some of those gatherings to sign on the war in Iraq. And sometimes when you don't accept to be part of those programs, you are called, you are not good in interfaith work. You are not a part of what is needed in the moment. Thank you, Dr. Danish, for referring to a program that divided the Muslim community in America. Abdullah Antibly and the Muslim Leadership Program. That was, by the way, number one target of that program was Muslim chaplains in higher education. Then they went on to imams in the country. And when we refused to be a part of that program, we, not me necessarily me personally, but I know so many Muslim chaplains were shunned by their universities because they refused to participate in some of these programs in the State of Israel when we knew that much of that money came in from the IDF directly to fund those programs. Much can be said about that, but I think it's really important. The CVE program that came out during Obama administration, countering violent extremism, and how interfaith work was used not to counter violent extremism in all religions, but to target Islam in America and elsewhere. I want to end by talking about, and I would love your input all on this, what I said, but connected to that, the Abraham Accord. Building on wonderful interfaith work between Jews, Christians, and Muslims worldwide, but again, to advance a political agenda of a specific people, of a specific agendas in the Middle East, ending with normalizing occupation, and most recently, the genocide.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a theme that we've touched upon a little bit already, the politicization of interfaith work that presents itself as sort of promoting understanding, dialogue, peace and stability, but at the end of the day, it has a decided political agenda that's trying to advance. The Abraham Accords, I think, is a perfect demonstration of this. What I was reminded of when the Imam was speaking, if you look at Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza that was written by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Tony Blair, there's actually a reference to interfaith dialogue.
Oh.
Yeah. So we're going to have interfaith dialogue in the context of a post-genocide situation, and that's the way forward for peace and stability. Sounds very good, but when you look at the details, there's a lot there to complain about. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to complete the picture, I think there's colonial enterprises going on, advertising themselves as interreligious engagements. I would say, and of course you know that, but I want to mention it. So I've been invited to an event in Abu Dhabi. And I had mixed feelings about that. So I was very happy that in the AAR there's this group on interfaith and interreligious studies that does a lot of, let's say, decolonializing language around interreligious dialogue. So I was able to discuss with them, should I go, should I not go? If I don't go, someone else will go. So what's the message that I will bring? I want to say, so of course it happens also in the Muslim world. You all know that, but it is important to see how the colonial players are in different places of the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point in terms of, being careful not to fall into that trap. We have about 10 minutes left. I want to just end by playing a short clip. I want to end by playing a short clip that speaks to a lot of the themes that we've already addressed today. And what you're going to see in this clip is very much two people who you're both familiar with speaking about two conceptions of Muslim-Christian relations and the future of those relations in this country that address the issues that have already been put on the floor, but in a very sort of dramatic way. Because I always believe when we have these conversations about Muslim-Christian relations, we need to deal with the real world in which we're living in. So this is an exchange that happened recently in the context of the New York mayoral race, and it was an exchange between the vice president of this country, J.D. Vance, and the new mayor of New York, Zoran Mamdani. So I'd like to play the clip, but before playing it, I noticed that those of us on the stage only can see it through this screen. So if you could maybe just, adjust your chairs. Okay, we can see it now. If you could play the clip, and then I'll get the panel to comment on it, and then we can sort of wrap up with that as sort of a closing theme that I think ends on a very positive note in terms of the future of Muslim-Christian relations in the United States at this fraught moment. Go ahead.
All right, current affairs right here. Vice President J.D. Vance just said he thinks it's okay if Americans don't want neighbors who speak different languages than them recently.
I don't know these people. They don't speak the same language that I do. And because there are 20 in the house next door, it's a little bit rowdier than it was when there was just a family of 4, a family of 5. It is totally reasonable and acceptable for American citizens to look at their next door neighbors and say, I want to live next to people who I have something in common with.
We're standing here in Diversity Plaza, which in many ways embodies a very different America, the very one that he's criticizing there. I wondered if you could comment on the Vice President's remarks and the America that you're defending.
These remarks, this language from the Vice President of this country, it betrays so much of the promise that we have as a nation. And I stand here in Diversity Plaza proud to be an immigrant New Yorker, proud to call this borough my home, a borough where there are more languages spoken than most cities in the world, and proud to be on the precipice of becoming the first immigrant mayor of this city in generations. Yeah. And the fact that the Vice President would view someone speaking a different language in this country as something that should be avoided, as something that could be pushed out of our reality. It is so emblematic of the politics that we are trying to show a contrast to, a politics that has room for each and every person that calls the city home.
So there you have two visions, I think, of the United States that are in contest today here in this country, in the context of this authoritarian moment, which is why my students today were so enthusiastic. I couldn't keep them quiet. I had to shut down the conversation. They just wanted to talk about Zoran Mamdani and the vision that he was presenting for the future of this country. And I'm glad, Donish, you mentioned this. One of the unreported things, but it's in the New York Times article today that I referenced that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, is that the campaign that Mamdani put together was very much a campaign rooted in drawing upon people's religious identities, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, and secular groups to fight for a better country, a better the United States. And I think that what resonated me with that clip is very much overlaps with the theme that Ibrahim sort of introduced and others have introduced about the the very real tensions that we're facing globally with the rise of right-wing populism, this replacement theory, the idea that somehow religious pluralism, people of different cultures who speak different languages and eat different foods is something to be shunned and to be sort of repudiated instead of being embraced. I think this is sort of the big challenge of our moment going forward, is dealing with this very real challenge of right-wing populism and the type of political agenda that they're trying to present to all of us. So I thought that was sort of a good note to sort of end on. I'll leave one last round for our distinguished panel to sort of comment on this broad theme, and I'll recite the title of this session again: Accomplishments, Challenges, and Suggestions for Future Christian-Muslim Relations. By showing that clip, have sort of put something on the table here in terms of suggestions for future Muslim Christian relations, but I don't want to have the last word. I want to allow the panel to weigh in on the broad themes of this panel. So maybe we could start with you, Pim.
Maybe I should begin by saying I am that neighbor because I speak a different language.
Yeah.
I don't have an American passport. I have a green card.
Yeah.
So every time I enter this country, I don't know what will happen. Of course, I'm white, I'm European. For the time being, I'm good. But I realize things are different.
Very good, thanks. Donish? Final thoughts.
One addendum I would offer is that people of different cultural persuasions need to be mindful that try as hard as they might, they will never fully be accepted into the prism of whiteness. And I say this keeping in mind that the rise of Elon Musk, I was very disappointed as a Pakistani American to see many desis idolizing Elon Musk because of his business prowess, because he makes a lot of money. But ultimately, as far as Elon Musk is concerned, you people are cannon fodder. You will never be accepted into this universe. And
His universe.
His universe, exactly, into the universe of Elon Musk and of J.D. Vance. His poor wife is now being second guessed.
Yeah.
So
one of the ironies of his comments there is that he's married to an Indian woman, so he has mixed race children.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ryan?
I'm going to go even further back in history, if that's okay. So
Sure,
I'm going to put my scholarly hat on and think about what we and why I study the Syriac and Arabic speaking Christian communities and their history. And one of the sort of things that I try to bring forward into the classroom is that we can learn from them. We can learn deeply from them. These are Christians who lived and worked side by side with Muslims at the very sort of nascent Islam. And very practically, these were translators. They were literally translating Syriac and Greek texts into Arabic. But to get to the video and to connect it to that, they were relationally translating. They were translating across difference. And I think that is the call for us as Christians to translate across difference. When we hear things like this, to call that out and then translate why that's wrong and something else is better.
Very good, thanks. Halil?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate to hear that from the vice president. I'm not sure if I can even believe that, given his wife's migration background. I can't really take that serious. But also, I think this kind of attitude is not new. It's rather kind of ingrained in the history of this nation, because if we look how big this country is, and I'm sure people have always thought, I don't like this person, so I'm going to move farther away. And you can see it in the nature of this country. It's so big, but you have communities all over the place because they moved, because they had they practiced the Eucharist different, or they had a different belief in the Trinity, something like that. But also, as a European, I can tell, I can praise how especially migrants welcome this American identity, because I don't see European Muslims embrace French nationality, German nationality, maybe British, but I see Muslims here especially embrace to be American. If I ask them, this is my thinking coming from Europe, seeing a brown Muslim and telling them where you're really from.
Yeah.
When they will say okay, I'm from the West Coast, I'm from Chicago, I'm here, I'm from there. I always go on and ask them where you're really from, because that's the kind of questions we are asked in Europe. But I feel American Muslims especially, they just became part of the fabric of this country, and is praiseworthy. And it's celebrated, as you can see, by the results of this mayoral election.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to end on. So please join me in thanking this panel for their contributions to this event.
And I'd like to take a moment to thank all the participants. These have been two very substantive conversations, which will be available on the website, right? The program?
Yes, absolutely.
So a video will be produced. And besides the racial redlining, which is echoing in part of the vice president's response, which has been my whole lifetime of property values and race and culture, the shortest part of Nostra Aetate is section 5. And I just thought I'd read it. We cannot truly, this is Stransky's translation, we cannot truly call upon God the Father of all if we refuse to behave as sisters and brothers with anyone created as we all are in the image of God. The relation of man and woman to God the Father and their relation to their fellow human beings are linked to such a degree that Holy Scripture says, whoever does not love does not love God. That's the letter of John. No foundations, therefore, remain for any theory or practice that leads to discrimination between person and person, between people and people, insofar as their human dignity and the rights flowing from them are concerned. The Church reproves as foreign to the mind of Christ any discrimination or harassment against men or women because of their race or color, condition in life, or religion. On the contrary, following in the footsteps of the holy apostles Peter and Paul, this sacred synod ardently implores the Christian faithful to maintain good conduct among all people. That's the letter of Peter. And if possible, to live for their part in peace with all, so that we may truly be sons and daughters of the Father who is in heaven. That's the end of Nostra Aetate. Thank you all for coming and participating.